Daphne's gossipy, fiery gaze landed on Astoria. Astoria, however, was even more bewildered. She had no idea why Malfoy had suddenly gone mad, as if cursed. Nor did she understand how he could have such stamina. That day, Malfoy ran up and down the castle more than 10 times. His fitness was astonishing. John, the culprit, couldn't help but marvel at how nourishing Daphne's magical cooking must be. If Malfoy ate it for half a month straight, he might even develop Neville's kind of physique. Then again, if just one bite produced this effect, John thought grimly, Malfoy would probably kill himself on the spot if he ate a whole dish. February passed quietly and in order. Seventh-year classes were relentless, and the looming NEWTs only increased the pressure. More than a few students regretted not having started seventh-year material during sixth year. Time edged toward March, and with March came a piece of news that reshuffled the pureblood world. The old Sacred 28 was reborn, only under a new name. Pureblood. The term went back to Salazar Slytherin and meant, in theory, no Muggle blood in a family line. In practice, strict adherence to that definition would leave fewer than 10 truly pure families. The old Sacred 28 had always been a patchwork of appearances. Names burned from family trees, inconvenient branches erased, marriages arranged to preserve status. The Black family had literally burned names to keep the tree clean. In truth, the purity was often self-deception. Intermarriage bound those families into a web of relations. Some clans had even resorted to incest to preserve blood, like the Gaunts, sometimes producing twisted or impaired heirs. When the Sacred 28 was reordered, it was no longer a list of supposed biological purity. It was a list of strength and history. Families that had endured for 1,000 years and still wielded power deserved recognition. Some powerful pureblood houses had been left out before because a distant Muggle or squib had smeared their pedigrees. Now those criteria mattered less. The new name fit the new logic, the Ancient Alliance. Lucius Malfoy announced that name in the dim rotunda beneath Malfoy Manor. He addressed the gathered heads of family with clear, cold purpose. "We need ties stronger than the old Sacred 28, he said. "Times change. We must change with them." He tapped his cane on the stone. "We were scattered before. Potential wasted. Our lines are dwindling. We must adapt." He reminded them of their origins, Amanda Malfoy arriving in Britain with William the Conqueror, and argued that adaptation had been the Malfoys' secret to survival. "This is the era of the king," he declared. "Stubbornness will not win the day." Conversation rippled through the room. Lucius raised a hand. "Power is supreme. The ancients will die out, victors endure." The head of the Goyle family stood and agreed without hesitation. "The Sacred 28 is dust. The Ancient Alliance is the future." Crabbe followed. Greengrass, Diggory, Slughorn, Parkinson, Abbott, Crouch all leaned toward the new alliance. The pressure to join mounted. Anyone who resisted would be crushed by the tide. The king, still at Hogwarts, would not tolerate outdated factions. Either ride this ship to prosperity or fall behind and be swept away. Arthur Weasley sat expressionless, thinking. Percy's pragmatism echoed in his mind. Consider the children. If Weasley did not join the alliance, the family risked suppression and a much harder life for his children. As the 28 slots filled, Arthur raised his hand at the last moment. Lucius regarded him without his usual sneer. "You have chosen the correct path. Arthur Weasley," Lucius said. "The new Ancient 28 was announced, now properly called Ancient Clans. They were old families with real influence. First Ancient Clan, Malfoy. Second Ancient Clan, Weasley. Third, Crouch. Fourth, Greengrass. Fifth, Longbottom. Sixth, Edgar. Seventh, Diggory. 10th, Slughorn. 13th, Delacour. 21st, Parkinson. 22nd, Goyle. 23rd, Crabbe. 28th, Macmillan. The Ancient Alliance was born. The leaders signed a contract in the Malfoy Rotunda and set up a communal fund, co-owned by all 28 clans. They appointed a manager, Lucius Malfoy, and he made the first allocation from the massive purse. Half of the fund went to the Little Wizard Fund. "We are not decaying relics," Lucius promised the assembly. "Our reemergence will better maintain peace in the magical world." Lucius wore the part of the proud pureblood who could also act for the public good. The new alliance meant old rot would be purged. Selwyn and Lestrange were examples of clans aligned with the new order. Goyle and Crabbe, by contrast, benefited from following the right leader. They practically coasted into the alliance. Their families, crude as they were, did contain some surprisingly capable members. When Lucius proposed the fund, Goyle and Crabbe were among the most enthusiastic donors, nearly pouring half their assets into it. Their point was simple. When a primary account falters, a secondary account can bring unexpected fortune. Old Goyle and Old Crabbe still had to serve another year in prison. Their sons, however, had already half-stepped into John's circle of followers. Arthur Weasley watched the show of wealth from the other families and felt a twinge of embarrassment. The Weasleys were not rich. Who were these displays for? Just as he was wondering whether to throw in a token 100 galleons to show good faith, Percy strode in and presented 20,000 galleons on behalf of the Weasley family. Arthur was stunned. Percy said flatly, "You should pay attention to your sons. George and Fred earned over 100,000 galleons last year." Arthur felt foolish for not having noticed. He had pictured the twins tinkering away at home and never imagined their business. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, now the most profitable enterprise under Silverhand, had become so lucrative. He still thought of them as chaotic inventors, unaware of how successful they really were. With the alliance established, Malfoy had risen to the head family. At Hogwarts, his manner shifted from sneering, "You are all trash," to openly challenging anyone who disagreed. "You're trash. Fight me if you dare." Ernie Macmillan was privately delighted that his family had been ranked last and could scarcely contain his glee. Hannah Abbott's family placed 25th, a fair reflection. The Abbotts were several steps behind many of the others, but they were in the list all the same. Section 602. The Malfoys had fame, the Weasleys had people, the Crouches had power, and the Greengrasses had money. The Abbott family had none of those four things. So when the rankings came out, nobody complained. The four strongest were represented. When Ron Weasley saw the list, his confidence shot up. He had long suspected his family wouldn't rate highly and had even once slandered the ancient alliance in Gryffindor, calling it a cabal of corrupt purebloods. That rebuke stung, but it was oddly satisfying. The quick thinkers among the students understood what the list really meant. It's all about who's closest to John Wick. Dumbledore saw it the same way. The so-called Ancient Alliance served John. The Malfoy entry pointed to Draco's family. The Weasley entry signaled Percy Weasley's kin. Percy was being groomed for a run at Minister of Magic within the next decade. The Crouch listing was obvious, John's partner. The Greengrass entry mattered because both Greengrass daughters belonged to the Constellation Society. Longbottom appeared too. Neville Longbottom's family, the one who had killed Voldemort, and who was also in the Constellation Society. Edgar and Diggory were on the list as well, both Constellation members. Lucius Malfoy had revealed his hand at the Alliance's founding, donating half the ancient fund to the Silverhand's Little Wizard Fund, a public declaration of whose orders he followed. Dumbledore sighed. With the situation shifting, British Magical Society had slipped largely into John's sphere of influence. The king had not yet shown himself, but his shadow was everywhere. Chapter 6118, Born in Death, European Craze. John kept watching the Star Spirit Guards and how they changed. Over time, they developed diversity, not so much in their Star Spirit forms as in their personalities and specialties. The annoying ones grew more annoying. He watched the little dragons swaggering into a doorway, and moments later, the Star Spirits behind that door all transformed. The little dragon was chased out, head tucked under its paws, scurrying away. "I didn't realize Draco's influence was that strong," John muttered. The little dragon attracted hatred like its master attracted enemies, externally for one, internally for the other. John regretted not insisting the little dragon remain at Hogwarts. Perhaps it should have. There were benefits, though. The little dragon's defensive shield had strengthened from constant battering. Hector's talents focused entirely on Starflash, making different attacks flow seamlessly into that move. Hermes had become dexterous. He could clap and pull two swords made of rock from the earth. The two Star Spirit Guards showed clear, distinct talents. John realized these guards needed to be close to people to develop further abilities. The guard that had followed Neville now had an arm broader than most. A single punch could make the ground tremble, and it was developing a tendency to grow toward 9 feet tall. Daphne's guard had learned a suite of throws and holds, techniques he'd used on the little dragon repeatedly. Watching their growth, John glanced at the time. Class! The Constellation Society door opened in the first floor corridor, and John stepped through. It was Care of Magical Creatures Day. Hagrid had been waiting for him, not at his hut, but at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. John, Hagrid waved, and then seeing John, gestured for quiet. He pointed at a thestral circling nearby. It's giving birth, Hagrid whispered, voice full of awe. A female thestral paced and nudged a tree trunk with her head to ease labor. Hagrid, judging by size and movement, had predicted the moment. Around them the forest seemed to hold its breath. The thestral finally lowered herself, and a small, wobbling foal dropped to the earth. The newborn could not get up. The mother ran anxious circles, nudging and urging. Hagrid's face fell. It's a defective foal. The herd might cast it out. Newborn defects mean harsh choices in nature. The mother knew. After 2 rounds, she pushed the foal with her head, the last warmth it would feel. John looked at Hagrid. You're not going to help it? Hagrid shook his head. If it can't make it on its own, it can't rejoin the herd. Even wizards have to respect nature's laws. John watched as the foal made one last, desperate attempt to stand. He reached out, just a touch of will, and the foal wobbled up. It stumbled, but didn't collapse. It made it, Hagrid whispered, relief breaking his voice. John hadn't healed the foal's hind legs. He'd only planted a seed of balance and willpower in its mind. It learned to stand by its own effort. Watching Hagrid, John understood why the giant kept a purity of feeling different from others. Hagrid saw the world's plainest truths and loved them. An owl approached then, clutching a copy of the paper. As it neared, a white figure, Basil, popped into view, kicked the owl so a dozen feathers flew, and caught the falling newspaper with practiced ease before landing on John's arm. Basil preened. I think I should write an apology to the owl post office, John joked, smiling at the bird's smugness. He opened the paper. Hagrid blinked. Aren't papers only delivered in the morning? I'm their super VIP, John said with a shrug. I read mine early. He had half the shares in the Daily Prophet, after all. The headlines were all first-hand scoops. One spread read, European craze. John scanned it. Europe was boiling over with events. The German Minister of Magic had been missing for months. No one could leave the ministry leaderless, and a fresh fight for the post had erupted. Yale Fan was one candidate. A fervent admirer of Dumbledore, he'd publicly urged Dumbledore's return at the International Confederation of Wizards. That association made him vulnerable. Those linked to Dumbledore often became targets. Other German candidates quietly opposed Yale Fan because he controlled the powerful Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Among the names John recognized was Ludwig Edgar. Edgar, as minister, would mean Durmstrang falling under someone else's influence. The short-term power of a minister was great, but long-term influence often lay with heads of schools like the principal of Durmstrang. John considered his options. Perhaps I can support someone, he murmured, eyeing the list of Yale Fan's rivals. Turning the page, Poland was making its own stir. The Polish Minister of Magic had been attacked in broad daylight by a group called the Saints. The crowd had intervened and saved him, but the assault had come frighteningly close to success. The eyes of Europe were on every move, and tensions were rising faster than anyone had expected. Chapter 619, Alone in Poland, The Truth. The Star Disciples were consumed by the public's fury. He was dead. You can't blame the people, the commentators said. They were only protecting a hero. Who knows how many others wanted him dead? They would have had to trample over a body to do it. John read the commentary and felt a chill. Poland, a place the Star Disciples themselves thought off limits, had been penetrated so easily? The thought unsettled him. Poland. Inge Griffiths stood on stage delivering a speech while the crowd roared like a throng of the converted. They shouted for freedom and for punishment, eyes glassy with a fanaticism that felt like the future pumped into their veins. The Star Disciples' attack had crystallized their sense of justice. Rippy, in the crowd and alarmed by the fervor, had been there when the attack happened, and he had noticed things others had not. He had come back to the small building where the attacker had been and stared at the horrid bloodstains. He made people into beasts, he breathed. In a world where everyone could use a wand, These people had relied on the most primitive, brutal means to kill. Worse, no one in the crowd saw it as wrong. They celebrated, convinced they'd upheld justice. Rippy, an assassin by trade, knew the scene didn't make sense. He stood where the blood had pooled and thought aloud, if I were attacking, I wouldn't choose this spot. No escape route, no cover, immediately exposed to everyone's gaze. If Grindelwald's follower wanted to die, he would have come closer. He muttered to himself. Old Barty had ordered him to stay in Poland, and that order let him probe among the fanatics. Poland had become an iron drum encircling the magical world, and Rippy, trapped inside, was the only person who might unlock what had happened. A terrifying possibility rose in his mind. He wanted to be killed. The attacker's laugh as he died had not been a cry of fear. It had been a sacrifice. That single attack had forged Inge Griffith's supporters into an iron wall, uniting the magical world in unprecedented hostility toward outsiders and elevating the Polish Minister of Magic's prestige. What kind of person could turn dying at the hands of enraged citizens into a rite of martyrdom? Who could make someone willingly endure such a death to exalt a politician? Inge Griffiths, Rippy whispered. His life was ordinary until Grindelwald appeared. After that, he became world-renowned. He had a lead now. If he followed it carefully, he could piece together the truth. Grindelwald. Griffiths. I need to investigate properly. Pulling his hood low, Rippy melted into the march of supporters. He had to be cautious. Alone here, he was vulnerable. He could have left, but the fragment he'd uncovered wasn't enough. The only way forward was to get into the Ministry of Magic. The bodies still lay there. The dead couldn't speak, but their bodies told everything they'd been through. Late that night, Rippy stole a coat, changed into it, and slipped into the Polish Ministry of Magic. His earlier meeting with old Barty had given him a rough idea of the layout. He guessed the body would be kept on the lowest floor. He rode the elevator down and thought. The corpse of the famous Grindelwald would not be disposed of carelessly. It was a symbol of Inge's heroism. Rippy studied the recorded images of the body and frowned. That scar doesn't look natural. A wizard's ordinary injuries could be fixed by charm or potion. There was only one true exception, the dark arts, and someone of Grindelwald's power should not be left with a scar from dark arts. If old Barty was right, the body might not be Grindelwald at all. But why did it look like him? In the magical world, even an animagus could be exposed. Rippy, skilled in transfiguration, was sure a dead person couldn't fool him with a simple disguise. So it had to be something else, neither polyjuice nor transfiguration. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened. Rippy looked up quickly and lowered his head when a familiar face stepped in, the tall Auror who had driven him from the main hall the last time, flanked by 3 others. Rippy shrank into a corner, grateful for the hat he'd grabbed. Going down to the Black Zone? The tall Auror asked. Rippy altered his voice and answered calmly, Director Grimm asked me to find some files. The observers are keeping Director Grimm busy these days, it seems, the Auror said with a half-smile. Rippy made a mental note of that code name. The elevator reached the Auror office, and the officers filed out. The tall Auror paused at the door and added, The disciplinary department isn't so scary. You don't need to look so nervous. The disciplinary department was the Auror squad that reported directly to the minister. Rippy had watched them raid the houses of corrupt officials in recent days, dragging people away and never seeing them again. It was an organization used to consolidate power, and the Polish people cheered every time they hauled a wealthy, corrupt person away. The elevator doors shut. Rippy wiped sweat from his brow. He had feared he'd been exposed. Caught in the ministry of another country without permission could be treated as an intruder, or worse, an assassin trying to kill the minister. When the floor indicator settled on 10, he stepped into the Black Zone. This area held the most confidential items. To the left lay the archive room, to the right, the secretive inner area of the Black Zone, completely dark, visible only to those holding a Hand of Glory. Rippy paused, listened, and then pulled the Hand of Glory from his inner coat pocket. I'm lucky, he murmured, ran into someone from the Black Zone by chance. He lit the Hand of Glory with his wand. The faint candlelight was his only security as he went deeper. Shelves displayed relics from the last war, odd artifacts and mementos. He paused at a muggle missile sitting on a shelf and absent-mindedly touched it, surprised to find rust and age. He didn't know what it could do, only that its presence felt ominous. Further in, he finally saw the body. Grindelwald, or what everyone said was Grindelwald, lay in a crystal coffin. Rippy leaned close and scrutinized the face through the glass. "Impossible," he whispered. "No polyjuice potion could hold that long." He tried the coffin lid. It shifted but barely moved. The seal was stubborn, and whatever lay inside did not want to be revealed easily. He flushed as he finally managed to force the coffin lid open. A heavy thud echoed in the cold chamber. Rippy reached inside and, holding the silver hand close, began to examine the body. Something was off. He felt along the lower leg beneath the knee and produced a small knife. With shaking fingers, he cut through the trouser leg. A jagged scar stared back at him. He cut the other leg and found the same scar. Pressing it, he realized the scar had been there for some time. He moved to the shoulder, felt something hard beneath the fabric, and cut again. A small object tumbled out, and the once towering figure of Grindelwald suddenly looked wrong. This wasn't Grindelwald. Rippy's mind raced. It wasn't a magical disguise. It was something cruder. They had broken bones and forced them to heal. He probed the face, found foreign packing in the nose and chin. Panic tightened his chest. No wonder the revealing charm had failed. This wasn't an enchantment at all. He pried open the mouth and recoiled at a fragment of severed tongue lodged inside. No wonder the corpse hadn't spoken at the meeting. The pattern became darker and clearer by the second. If this body was a fake, who had they killed to create it? Ing Griffith's face flickered through his memory. Rippy pressed on the abdomen and felt a hard object where there shouldn't be. He hesitated, then set the silver hand down, bracing himself. Teeth clenched, he sliced open the corpse's stomach and plunged his hand inside. The sensation made him nearly retch. After a few minutes, he withdrew something small and metallic. By the faint light, he saw a ring bearing a family crest, a skull emblazoned on it. His breath caught. "Minister Bart Schmidt," he muttered, "the German Minister of Magic." Bart Schmidt had been missing for months. His disappearance had rocked the German ministry. No one would have imagined he'd been turned into Grindelwald's fall guy. Slipping the ring into his pocket, Rippy felt the pieces click into place. The Polish Minister of Magic was almost certainly an imposter as well. Whoever had taken Schmidt's place was very likely Grindelwald. Everything made sickening sense. The Star Disciples' willingness to die, the way they seemed to know where their leader would be. It had all been staged, a sacrifice to elevate a figure to martyrdom and power. Grindelwald wanted to run for the highest office in the magical world. With the prestige of being the lone brave who killed the Dark Lord, he could win. The leader of the magical community also enforced the statute of secrecy. In power, Grindelwald could shred it entirely. Rippy's pulse hammered. He needed to tell Minister Crouch, and fast. He grabbed the silver hand and hurried out of the dark chamber. In the lift, he shared the cramped space with a tall Auror. The man pulled the grate open and, casual as if discussing the weather, asked, "Did you get the files?" Rippy answered quietly, "I did." "Good." The Auror nodded as he climbed in. The two of them rode in strained silence. Rippy broke it. "Another disciplinary mission?" "Something came up," the Auror said, glancing at Rippy and giving a quick once-over to his coat. "Careless people are everywhere. The observer can't miss corrupted officials." "Of course," Rippy replied, playing the part. When the lift stopped, the tall Auror stepped out and, with a vague attempt at civility, said, "For the people." He faltered on the name. "Zuogeng." Rippy hurried to oblige, smiling. "Zuogeng Dorag." "Nice to meet you." The lift doors slid shut. Then, almost as if on a whim, the tall Auror's head popped back into the car. "Do you know my name?" he asked. Rippy's stomach tightened. The lift had started moving again, and relief came with the motion. But then his eyes fell on his coat pocket and froze. There was a smear of blood on the fabric, unmistakable and damning. The lift shuddered and halted. Rippy's face went pale. Without a second thought, he drew his wand, pointed it upward, and shouted, "Blasting curse!" A violent explosion burst through the top of the lift car. Rippy hauled himself up through the newly created opening and scrambled out into the shaft. Heat hit him like a physical blow. From below came the tall Auror's voice, cold and clear. "Remember my name, Star Rosier." A slit of red light shone. Star's wand flared scarlet, and he detonated a blasting curse into the narrow shaft. A roar of flame leapt up, wrapping the lift in fire. 221B Spinner's End. A sharp, frightened scream cut the night. Tang Mi reached up to switch on the bedside lamp and wrapped his arms around the person trembling beside him. It's okay. It's okay. You're safe now. He stroked the shaking back. Tell me what happened, Oz. Ozhild's face was still drawn from the terror of a dream not yet relinquished. Her fingers gripped Tang Mi's hand like a lifeline. In a small, quivering voice, she said, I dreamed something happened to Rippy. Tang Mi paused, then reminded himself, he's at the Ministry of Magic. No, Oz insisted. The dream had been too vivid. He was sent on another task after he went to Poland. Rippy was head of the Auror training class. His rank was not trivial. What assignment would require him to go to Poland in person? Oz looked fragile, suddenly a child, clinging to Tang Mi's assurance. The three of them had once been inseparable. During the time Tang Mi had been away after being bitten by a werewolf, Rippy had been the one to help Oz out of the shadows. He had never taken advantage of his friends. He had only ever tried to protect them. Tang Mi kissed Oz's cheek and said with steady warmth, I'll send someone to Poland to investigate. Don't worry, Rippy will be fine. Oz clung to that promise, desperate. Tang Mi finally got her to lie down and slipped into the bathroom to splash water on his face. He dressed quietly, each movement heavy with dread. Poland. He thought of John's arrangement to send the Star Disciples to Poland and felt the thread of something terrible pull taut. Without hesitation, he went out into the night and made for Silverhand Johnny. Send me every scrap of news from Poland, he ordered. 605, Section 605. Given his current position, his words carried more weight than those of any high-ranking ministry official. As soon as he arrived, Silverhand's vast information network sprang into action. Reports about the situation in Poland were fed to him without pause. Tang Mi read them carefully and continued through the night. He didn't stop until one particular piece of intelligence arrived. Polish Ministry of Magic attacked by Grindelwald remnants. Over 3 ministry employees injured. Partial building collapse. It was a short dispatch attached to a newspaper delivered that morning. Silverhand had used its connections to obtain backup copies of the on-site photographs. An elevator shaft blown out, ministry employees unconscious in an alley, the corpse of a Grindelwald follower mangled. Tang Mi flipped through the images until he stopped on the last one. A hand crushed beneath rubble, a wand still clutched in it while angry citizens hurled stones. When he saw that wand, Tang Mi felt as if struck by lightning. He recognized it instantly. Rippy's wand. Rippy had never changed his wand. It still bore a chip from the time he'd been chasing a dark wizard. Tang Mi remembered pulling Rippy out of the line of fire when the dark wizard's curses nearly hit them, and Oz stepping forward to knock the assailant down. Others would later take credit for parts of it, but everyone had been grateful they'd arrived in time. Something inside Tang Mi exploded. He erupted hoarsely, tore the newspaper to shreds, and the pieces blew out the window into Nocturne Alley, where newsboys were hawking the morning papers. The photograph of the hand crushed under rubble, the wand slipping from its grip, Ministry of Magic. Old Barty read the paper in stunned silence. Pierce cleared his throat and asked cautiously, Minister? Old Barty folded the newspaper with trembling hands and set it down. His face was composed, but sorrow glittered in his eyes. Request an investigation, he said to Pierce. Find him. If we send people into Poland, Pierce began, hesitating, British Aurors operating across borders could provoke an international incident. Old Barty cut him off coldly. Enter secretly and investigate. We cannot allow one of our people to vanish without a trace. No one could yet guarantee the hand under the rubble belonged to Rippy. That old Barty had brought Rippy to Poland, said he trusted him deeply. A trusted subordinate disappearing without explanation was intolerable. With old Barty's order, an operation was launched to find the missing Auror. Chapter 621, The Disappeared Auror, Remedial Classes Hogwarts. John looked at the timid owl perched at the far end of the table, then watched as Basil sauntered over, stepping on Crabbe's hand along the way. Don't you think the owls are getting more intimidated by him? Malfoy complained. He always felt this owl was more overbearing than he was. John said nothing. Basil approached the delivery owl. A single disdainful glance sent it into a panic. It dropped its newspapers and flew off, clipping a window on the way out. Basil picked up the paper, strolled back, and trod on Goyle's hand as he did. He deposited the paper into John's hand. Malfoy fed Basil a piece of bacon. The owl gave him a haughty look, then turned to accept Astoria's fond pat. "I won't let anyone be more arrogant than me at Hogwarts." Malfoy slammed his hand on the table and stood up, visibly agitated. A few minutes later, his hair was a mess, and he had fallen into brooding. "Is your owl even a real owl, John?" John ignored Malfoy's theatrics and read the headlines. "Saints invading the Ministry of Magic?" His instincts told him the report might not be reliable. He flipped through the rest of the papers and laid down the last one, which contained news about the upcoming election. As he looked up, Riddle flew over and delivered a letter. It was from Tang Mi. John broke the seal, skimmed the letter, and then told Malfoy and the others, "I'll be gone for a while." He stood and left. Daphne watched him go, her slate-gray eyes full of worry. John walked to an empty corridor and opened Tang Mi's letter. "Rippy Cabayer." Several photographs slipped from the pages. John muttered, "He found something." If Rippy had been exposed while infiltrating the ministry, he must have discovered something worth chasing. John burned the letter in his palm and sighed. "I like that guy." Rippy had been one of the key people in John's operations within the Ministry of Magic. He was clever, prudent, and instrumental in facilitating Barty's change of identity. Old Barty intended to groom him as part of his inner circle. That bright future now seemed cut off. John stared at the photograph of the wand. Someone has to go to Poland, he decided. Poland. A small team slipped across the border covertly. They were aurors from the British ministry, 5 in all, and they began their investigation the moment they arrived. There are many ways to pick up traces of the past in the magical world. Some aurors specialized in exactly that. The Polish ministry itself was unusually quiet today, the damaged elevator shaft a grim focal point. "Remember," the lead auror said in a low voice, "we're here illegally. Don't let anyone discover us. We need to find Rippy Cabayer." Understood. They first visited Rippy's usual hotel, disguised and asking discreet questions. The owner told them Rippy hadn't returned since the previous day. The news hit them hard. They split up to search different leads across the city. Unbeknownst to them, every move they made was being watched. Malfoy felt like he was on the verge of a brain hemorrhage. The two troll-like idiots kept testing his patience. "If you fail and can't take part in training because of this, I will absolutely have you expelled," he snapped. A cold aura rolled off him, and Goyle and Crabbe shrank back into meek submission. There was nothing they could do. They'd already been given an ultimatum. Snape had said he couldn't tolerate such incompetence in Slytherin. Their 7th-year test performance had been abysmal, as if 2 deformed trolls were attending school. With Theodore gone, the job of tutoring the pair had fallen to Malfoy. When Theodore did it, he took the mocking and sneers. When Malfoy did it, he used threats and hexes at the slightest disagreement. It was obvious. Malfoy had learned to be vicious. One result was hilariously grotesque. Goyle's left buttock had swollen far larger than the right. Malfoy had not been gentle with his curses. Malfoy's sour mood made Blaise reluctant to approach him. John hadn't been seen for the past few days. Neville had bumped into him at the Constellation Society, where John had been researching the Star Spirit Guards. Compared with the Slytherin's tutoring woes, the Gryffindors were downright enthusiastic. "Dumbledore's personally teaching you?" Ron blurted. Hermione slapped his arm quickly and hissed for him to be quiet. Ron realized his slip and lowered his voice. "So what's going on? You've been gone these past few days. Have you been with Dumbledore?" "Not just Dumbledore," Harry said, glancing around. "Sirius and the others too." "Lord Voldemort is dead, isn't he?" Hermione asked, puzzled. "Why are they suddenly training you?" "Dumbledore asked me about Grindelwald," Harry replied. "He thinks Grindelwald might still be alive." "Impossible. The newspapers all said he's dead," Hermione said reflexively. "Newspapers don't have the whole truth," Harry said. "They used to call me a liar and say I had no one to love." Hermione accepted that with a thoughtful frown. Ron, however, had moved from envy to curiosity. "If Grindelwald isn't dead, then who did the Polish Minister of Magic kill?" he asked, and Harry had no good answer. He'd only gleaned Dumbledore's suspicion from conversation and wasn't sure of the details. Still, Dumbledore teaching him was something Ron could envy. "Dumbledore's the greatest wizard in the world," he sighed. "Dumbledore doesn't always teach me," Harry said. "My occlumency lesson yesterday was with Snape." "Snape?" Ron's envy evaporated in an instant. He winced. "Oof, you're in for it then." Snape's harshness had never endeared him to the others. Harry remembered the lesson with a sinking feeling. He would much rather have avoided it. "Enough about that," Hermione said briskly. "We need to prepare for the Ravenclaw match." Katie Bell had graduated last year, and Ron had taken over as Seeker. He rubbed his hands together. "This year we're going to win the cup." Their recent victory over Hufflepuff had reignited Gryffindor's fighting spirit. Beat Ravenclaw, and they'd only have Slytherin to face in the final. Even Harry set aside his tutoring to get back into top form. Hermione, not being on the team, could only cheer. An owl dropped a newspaper through the portrait hole. Hermione picked it up and skimmed the headline, "5 Aurors Missing." Old Barty's face stared from the photograph, grave and taut. The Aurors who had gone to Poland had not been heard from. Their disappearance had alarmed many. Aurors were the Ministry's main fighting force. Losing even one was cause for serious concern, and 5 was catastrophic. Barty Crouch Sr.'s vigilance toward Poland increased another notch. He made his decision. Chapter Old Barty's Grief, Confrontation. British Minister of Magic travels to Poland for an exchange. Barty arrived at the Polish Ministry of Magic and chose to enter openly onto the very ground where his subordinates had vanished. Inge Griffiths, the Polish minister, received him with polite warmth. The Polish wizards around them wore carefully practiced smiles. Barty stood and looked at those smiles, at the rubble and the burned-out buildings, and asked Pierce, his aide beside him, quietly, "Can a people really change?" Pierce shook his head. "Minister, they are embers about to go out." Fanaticism aside, the same hunger and poverty still clung to the place. Pierce was a realist. He had no sympathy for the idealists who claimed everything could be remade overnight. Barty peered at a collapsed wall, lifted a loose slab, and found the space beneath already empty. Someone had moved the body. "Welcome to Poland," Star Rosier said as he came forward to greet them. He glanced at the ruins with thin courtesy. "There are always those who try to harm our savior." Barty paused at the word. He forced a calm voice. "I hope this exchange goes smoothly." "Of course," Star replied with a smile. "We will ensure your safety." Inside the Polish ministry, one of Griffiths' attendants used a wand to lift a body suspended in midair. "He's dead," the attendant said casually. Barty stepped in and saw the floating corpse. His pupils tightened. "Rippy," he breathed. Griffiths turned and bowed slightly. "Minister Crouch, your arrival is most welcome. I trust your trip was comfortable?" Barty didn't respond to the pleasantries at first. His eyes were fixed on the charred, crushed body behind Griffiths. Pierce stepped in, offering excuse and hospitality. "I apologize. Our minister is fatigued from his journey." "It was my oversight," Griffiths said smoothly, not offended at all. "If you'd care to rest in my office," he glanced apologetically around. "I'm terribly sorry. Our ministry suffered an attack not long ago." Griffiths moved aside and revealed the body again. Blackened burns and bloody stains marked it. The crushing force of some explosion had almost disfigured the features beyond recognition. Barty stepped closer, taking in the clothes and whatever remaining details were left. He drew a long breath. It was Rippy, one of his missing Aurors. Someone had put the corpse on display, a calculated, cold message. "If you don't mind," Barty said after a moment, suppressing his grief to the best of his ability, "there are details I would like to discuss about your ministry." "Of course," Griffiths replied with a bland smile. Star waved his wand, and the body floated out of the office, led away as if it were a piece of theater. Barty watched Rippy's corpse go, namelessly removed. A hot anger flared, then was pushed down. He turned back to Pierce. "Pierce," he said, and when Pierce nodded, he brightened his tone to mask the grief. "Minister Griffiths, may I look around your ministry?" "Please do," Griffiths said, unbothered. Pierce moved through the damaged corridors, noting the blasted elevator and the scorch marks. "What a pity," he muttered. Meanwhile, Barty was shown into Griffiths' office. He paused beneath a painting of a windmill, more ritual than consolation. Griffiths gave a small bow. Because of Grindelwald, we must be careful. There are those who would do us harm. I understand, Barty said, though his heart ached. He had seen guards posted in the corridors. The ministry was on edge. He composed himself to face this inscrutable foreign minister. There's something I must apologize for, Barty said after a moment. Some time ago, because of Grindelwald, the International Confederation of Wizards supported your ministry's efforts, but things were rushed. Some personnel were not able to complete their return and debriefing. Oh, Griffiths feigned surprise. So there are still people here? Barty fixed him with a steady look. I believe 6 Aurors have not returned. I hope they haven't caused you trouble. Griffiths smiled in that carefully cultivated way. No, but I do not know where those 6 are. The Grindelwald remnants that have surfaced recently have given our ministry many headaches. Grindelwald remnants? Barty thought. He forced himself to be diplomatic. The body they had displayed was clearly meant as a bargaining chip. I've seen the damage to your ministry, he continued. I have a generous friend who runs Silver Hand Fashion Architecture. He could help with repairs. And as Minister of Magic, you surely have information about my missing men. Griffiths tilted his head as if considering. I do recall finding some strangers in one area. How many? 5. Griffiths smiled thinly. 5 strangers. They are likely still there now. Barty let out a slow breath. The 6th. I'm afraid, Griffiths interrupted, that one of them was found already. Chapter 607. There had been no shouting in the confrontation. It had gone smoothly. Barty Crouch stared at Griffiths and said quietly, I think my people ran into some remnants of Grindelwald's followers. He left the ministry and went to the site Griffiths had mentioned. There, he found the Aurors whose memories had been erased. All 5 of them had no recollection at all. It was as if they had arrived there with blank minds. Barty Crouch's visit to Poland didn't last long. When he returned to the ministry, Pierce emerged, shaking his head. Nothing, he said. Barty Crouch's face darkened. Had Rippy died for nothing? There is one thing, Pierce said. I'm sure Rippy found something. I asked around, Pierce continued. Witnesses said something fell from Rippy's pocket. He risked going back to pick it up when he could have escaped. Whatever it was had to be important for him to take that risk. But Pierce had examined Rippy's body and found nothing. Witnesses described the item as a ring. Barty Crouch understood then why Rippy had been killed. Because of that ring. The ring was missing. Had someone taken it, or had Rippy hidden it? Griffith's enigmatic smile came to mind. Barty could not keep throwing his people into danger. He needed help. There was only one person he could think of, the second king, John. Griffiths was clearly not ordinary. The way he had subdued 5 Aurors showed he was powerful. Barty Crouch couldn't openly deploy Aurors. He had to rely on John. If Griffiths hadn't found it, Barty told himself, he wouldn't be guarding the body so closely. He had a bad feeling that the ring mattered to Griffiths too. What hidden things did the hero who had killed Grindelwald really hold? On the streets of the Polish Wizarding Quarter, a hooded figure came to the collapsed building and scanned the area. Wary eyes watched him, and he slipped away. One of the watchers told the others, "Keep searching. That man must have hidden the item." The searchers moved on, while the hooded figure lingered at a distance and watched everything unfold. Chapter 623, Creating Momentum, Financial Offensive. The Minister of Magic visited Poland and had cordial meetings with the Polish minister. That man, I can't see through him, Barty Crouch admitted to John. At Silver Hand Manor, Barty Crouch arrived with Pierce. John sat quietly, idly stroking a ring with slender fingers. I can confirm Rippy found something that made others willing to kill him to stop him, Barty said. I want your help finding it in Poland. John stopped moving his fingers and glanced at Tang Mi, who had been at his side since Silver Hand was founded. Tang Mi looked hollow-eyed. The death of his friend had shaken him. Sir, I'll go, he said immediately. I can find it. No, John said, shaking his head. He looked at Tang Mi's grief and spoke calmly. Your anger won't just destroy you, it will bring trouble to everyone around you. Tang Mi was neither suitable for this mission now, nor anonymous. He was known as one of Silver Hand's emissaries and often traveled on the company's business. Many countries already recognized him. Even Polyjuice Potion didn't disguise someone forever, and there were many ways to unmask a disguise. Tang Mi fell silent. How could he be calm? It was his friend who had died, but he listened. John closed his eyes and then opened them. "I will send you," he said, "but not as part of an official mission." He looked to Barty. "Since he uses people as his blade, help his people." "This will be the third Silver Hand branch," John told Barty. "We'll open one in Poland." Barty Crouch smiled. He couldn't send Aurors secretly, and the ministry had no formal reason to interfere in Poland. But under the cover of humanitarian aid, no matter how much the Polish minister objected, they couldn't block the help. John was creating the perfect pretext. "I think he won't refuse this kind of assistance," John said. "We should hold a press conference." Barty understood. John was building momentum and carving out a piece of the Polish market. No matter what the Polish minister thought, it would look to the international community like Silverhand was helping Poland rebuild. Money gave John a shortcut. While others struggled to build reputations, he bought influence and publicity. The next day at the press conference, Silverhand announced it would open a branch in Poland. Silverhand Fashion Architecture would assist Poland in reconstruction and sponsor education for Polish wizard children. The international magical community quickly shifted focus to the initiative and praised Barty Crouch for facilitating it. At John's urging, Rita Skeeter, now editor-in-chief of the Daily Prophet, published glowing coverage of Barty's role. The paper splashed headlines everywhere. Generous funding. Barty Crouch joins hands with Silverhand to support Poland. The most successful minister of magic in a century. How well do you know Barty Crouch? Recounting a brilliant career, the most successful minister in a century, well-deserved. Exclusive interview, Gilderoy Lockhart on his long conversations with Minister Crouch. Hot take, Crouch didn't make Silverhand, it's Silverhand that helped make Crouch. The Untold Relationship, Silverhand and Crouch, a meeting of legends. Sociology analysis, the impact of Silverhand's aid on Poland's Ministry of Magic. Gringotts Goblin speaks out. Silverhand has more galleons than Gringotts. Almost the whole wizarding world was talking about two things. That Barty Crouch truly deserved the title of the most successful minister of magic in a century, and just how rich Silverhand really was. John set the paper aside and noticed Draco Malfoy's curious expression. "John," Malfoy said, half teasing, "my father says your money could fill Nocturne Alley. Is that true?" Malfoy's family was hardly poor, but they didn't claim to have enough galleons for such a thing. John shrugged. "What's the point of that? It's enough." "So you really could," Malfoy pressed. John smiled, deflecting. "Don't believe everything you hear." Malfoy looked skeptical. He'd heard the rumor from his own father, but since John dismissed it, he let it go. John ate calmly, feeling the magic in the meat as he chewed, and thought to himself, it could easily fill 2 alleys. Never underestimate Silverhand, the money-making machine. Contracts from ministries and related industries kept its income rising. The Weasley twins' joke shop had finally found its footing this year with a Hogsmeade branch, and their products were selling well overseas. Gilderoy Lockhart was a cash cow. His fame kept him in the spotlight, and even when his new book wasn't out yet, crazed fans would swarm his balcony. Instead of hiding, Lockhart charmed his intruders, signed autographs on whatever they brought him, and grew even more popular. His influence had helped Barty Crouch win votes, and his fans trusted his endorsements. Most of the magical community applauded Barty's aid to Poland. A few, however, were outraged. John found a small, hot-headed paper with an editorial, "Helping other countries is a waste." It accused Barty of sending resources abroad while many wizards at home lived in poverty, and attacked John Wick for monopolizing wealth and colluding with the minister. John read the paper and clicked his tongue. He wrote a note to Tang Mi, "Acquire that newspaper." Within a week, the paper had reversed course and was lavishing praise on Barty Crouch's wise decisions. Suddenly, the Minister of Magic was a household name. Willing to help other nations, he showed he wouldn't funnel resources only to his own country. Ministers of magic and officials across the world lauded his generosity and vision. Chapter 608. "I think Minister Crouch is the best minister of magic," Seamus Finnegan announced loudly. "I mean, he's incredible, isn't he?" There was a chorus of agreement. After all, During the battle at Hogwarts, it had been old Barty who descended like a god, personally leading the reinforcements that helped secure that brutal victory. That alone had won him the admiration of virtually everyone at Hogwarts. John had even heard Professor Slughorn praising old Barty's performance during class. In effect, the whole country had been won over. John smiled slightly. With enough information, you can remake someone's public image at will. Dumbledore had been a good example. Once a towering figure, even in the International Confederation of Wizards, he had been stripped of layer after layer of glory by a steady drip of damaging information. In the Muggle world, that sort of thing is messy and self-correcting. There are many independent channels and rapid feedback, but the wizarding world relied on owls and a handful of newspapers. Unfortunately for public figures, John controlled most of those channels. He even kept the Quibbler on a leash, leaving Xenophilius Lovegood as a nominal editor with a team that reported to John. He had made his move, and it had worked. Across Europe, John's use of capital to pry open closed doors was proving effective. In Poland, the Silver Hand strode into magical society like a conquering force. The Polish Ministry of Magic had to put on a welcoming face and make concessions wherever they could. Silverhand's presence genuinely boosted the local economy. They began recruiting the very first day, offering salaries that made people jump at the chance to join. The third Silverhand branch opened quickly. Silverhand fashion architecture was already walking the halls of the ministry as if planning renovations. Tang Mi went to meet the Polish Minister of Magic, Ingi Griffiths, to discuss the work. "This is what the British ministry used to look like, and this is what it looks like now," she said, producing a photograph of one of Silverhand fashion architecture's major projects. Griffiths glanced at the picture, smiling. "I fully trust Silverhand," he said, leaning forward in a way that made his smile seem sharp, "and I trust the Second King even more." Tang Mi, half werewolf, smelled danger in the man's easy confidence. A memory of a friend who had died under suspicious circumstances made her force a polite smile. "Thank you for the compliment," she said. Griffiths waved his hand toward Star. "Keep an eye on him," he added, his smile cooling. "I imagine Silverhand wouldn't refuse to station some of their people inside the ministry." Star understood the instruction. That afternoon, 2 new shop assistants arrived at the Silverhand Johnny store branch. Tang Mi's real reason for being there was more personal. She wanted to find Rippy's wand. Rippy had once modified his wand, making the handle detachable. He'd used the hollow to hide small things like cigarettes. If Rippy had hidden anything, Tang Mi was sure he would have chosen that spot. Getting access to the Auror office, however, was another matter. The constant surveillance made it difficult. As Tang Mi passed the Auror office, she glanced back. Star gave a smile and a small nod. "So annoying," Tang Mi muttered, her face falling, and then she moved on. John's official assignment for her was only to supervise the ministry renovation. No other duties had been given. Tang Mi would have to improvise. Back at Hogwarts, the last holiday before summer had arrived. Draco Malfoy was showing off his Easter egg, painted with the Malfoy family crest in green and silver. Astoria had a Malfoy design egg too. Daphne's was similarly ornate. Some students had eggs set with gems. Blaze's even had a ruby embedded in it. John received 3 eggs from home and could tell at a glance who had sent each one. The egg painted with a golden snitch and a seeker was from his father. The red-petaled egg with a puppy in the graffiti style was from Mrs. Wick. The pink egg with a small bear and an owl was from Ariana. Along with them came a letter from his father, bragging about preparations for a 13th hotel and an all-expenses-paid family trip to Hungary. Clearly revenge for the last Christmas John had spent away from the family. John crinkled the letter and thought, not for the first time, that his father was childish but fiercely competitive. John had been studying the Star Spirit Guards as well. They were highly adaptable magical creatures that didn't need to eat in the usual sense. They absorbed starlight at night to maintain themselves. That said, they weren't wholly uninterested in food. Constellation, a purely magical delicacy, was wildly popular with them. When Hector had once sampled Constellation, he had entered a burst of energy and glowed all over like a living bulb. John noted how little resistance magical creatures seemed to have to Constellation, whether unicorns, the spirits of the Black Lake, or the Star Spirit Guards. He stood for a moment looking at the 3 bottles of Constellation sitting in his cabinet, turning over possibilities in his mind. Professor Slughorn came to find him that afternoon, grinning and setting an egg aside. "The paperwork's gone through," he said proudly. "I think it won't be long before someone tells you to come and collect your new Merlin medal." Slughorn had even prepared a special cabinet in his office, leaving the top shelf empty for the medal. He wanted to celebrate and was awkwardly hopeful that John would attend the party he was planning. "If you're free," he began, then fumbled a little with his hands. If John came, it would give Slughorn a great deal of face. John was now more famous than the professor, and Slughorn enjoyed basking in reflected glory. John smiled. "I think I'll be free that evening." Slughorn practically floated on air. He threw little reassurances at John. Come any time, be fashionably late, he wouldn't mind, but mostly he was thrilled that John would attend. He'd been having parties almost every month lately and no longer needed to hide the way he had under Voldemort's regime. John, for his part, wanted to enjoy his last time at school. Easter brought a 2-week break, though everyone knew the holiday usually came with a slough of homework. Most students chose to remain at Hogwarts to get through it. Draco, however, had already gathered a Quidditch practice and secured the pitch early from Snape. John passed the pitch in the morning and saw Malfoy barking orders and drilling students who were already stressed by assignments. "I saw Astoria's murderous intent toward Draco in her eyes," someone joked. Malfoy was in high spirits and seemed to have forgotten that Astoria was in her 5th year, one of the busiest years at Hogwarts. She hadn't even finished her Transfiguration homework before being pulled into intensive training. Blaise made a bet with Pansy. Astoria will dump Draco this year, 10 galleons, and Pansy raised it to 20. Gryffindor, oddly enough, was grateful to Malfoy. By taking over the pitch, he had given their team a chance to finish homework in peace. There weren't many 7th years left in Gryffindor anyway, only Harry, Ron, and Dean Thomas. So Malfoy's push to train the next generation had practical as well as social motives. Chapter 609. There were a lot of Slytherins, and aside from Astoria, all the rest were 7th years. That naturally had its advantages, but the downside was obvious. Once they graduated, half the team would be gone. So much of Malfoy's training time was spent working with the new, second-generation players, which actually made everyone else breathe a sigh of relief. As the appointed next-generation captain, Astoria had to integrate with those younger players and never really got a break. When practice ended, Malfoy could be seen hurrying after Astoria, who stalked off without looking back, still fuming. The scene made Blaise clench his fist. "He can rile up even the calmest girl in Slytherin," he muttered. Blaise's words made the others wonder how far Malfoy's limits went. John, however, found the whole thing amusing. With Astoria's temper, she'd probably get over it after a bit of a fuss. After all, it wasn't Malfoy who held Astoria, Astoria held Malfoy. The Constellation Society had watched, step by step, as Astoria wrapped him around her finger. Chapter 625, Credence's Worries, Acolytes America. Credence woke sweating, his sleep haunted. In the dream he'd been back at Grindelwald's side. Those irresistible powers had closed around him like a chokehold. "We will not fail, Aurelius." The whisper echoed in his ears. Aurelius Dumbledore, the name Grindelwald had given him. The day he left Nagini, he'd learned of his parentage and been given a wand. That voice sounded as if it already knew the outcome, yet it radiated confidence, as if failure had never been an option. Grindelwald claimed he could see the futures. At the International Confederation election in Bhutan, he used the dark arts to animate the dead Keelan as a tool for seizing power. Before that, he saw a prophecy in a pool. The dead Cheelan's brother was still alive. It was a catastrophic oversight, and yet Grindelwald had been unnervingly calm. "Victory is there, waiting for us to obtain it. And I have seen the seeds I planted sprout." That was the last thing Credence remembered Grindelwald saying before he left. Seeds? What seeds? At the time, Credence still felt weakened by the Obscurus. He didn't understand what Grindelwald meant. For years, Grindelwald had fed him the idea that killing Dumbledore would hand all victories to the Acolytes. Credence had failed. He'd been no match for Dumbledore. How could someone who claimed to see the future speak so confidently in the face of failure? He had no answer, not then. He died in Godric's Hollow. If not for the necklace John had given him, he never would have left that place. The seeds I planted are sprouting. Credence bolted upright and rubbed his face, palms cold as he tried to shake the dream clear. Nightmare? A warm voice asked. Nagini's presence dispelled some of the chill. Credence shook his head. Just old things, he said. Nagini, neatly dressed as always, leaned in. What old things? Grindelwald. Credence kept his hand on her shoulder. I heard what he said. He said the seeds he planted were sprouting. I'm worried. He's always so mysterious. Credence's voice faltered. I think I'm dwelling on the past too much, Nagini. No, Credence. Nagini smiled. Everything that's happened to you has made you who you are. Every night, Credence went to sleep with a small terror that he wouldn't wake, that he'd lose Nagini all over again. Your pendant, he said, fingers brushing the charm at his throat. I feel something inside it. Nagini covered his hand with hers. It's pulsing, isn't it? Lunch ended, and it was time for work. Even Dumbledore himself had to work at a Silverhand Johnny branch. Snake Lady, Johnson greeted Nagini respectfully, then shifted his gaze to Credence with a look that said he'd been caught off guard by his boss's pretty companion. Johnson was inwardly crestfallen. Boss, don't you see my muscles? Picking that one, his thighs aren't even as thick as my arms, he thought melodramatically. Credence leaned close to Nagini and asked, Is he unhappy, Snake Lady? Nagini smiled. There had been some harmless personnel reshuffling in the 13th District, the American wizarding hub. Johnson handled branch security. Paul managed sales and negotiations. Credence had been given a counter job. Paul, flamboyant as ever, eyed Credence and whistled. Don't mind the big lug. He's just jealous. Thanks, Credence nodded. Paul shrugged and said, I don't know why you want to be here, but since you are, learn the rules. He plunked a monocle over his right eye. First rule, wear your glasses properly. Credence put the monocle on, and the items behind the counter shifted appearance. Oh, there's an order coming from the 7th District. I'll leave this to you. Paul suddenly remembered that goods hadn't arrived from the 7th District yet. He clapped Credence on the shoulder and hurried off. Credence watched him go, Nagini smiling at his awkwardness. Plain is good, she mouthed, and Credence returned the smile. The first customer came in. Credence stepped forward. May I help you? His voice stalled. His eyes were drawn to the person's collar. A symbol, a triangle enclosing a circle bisected by a vertical line, blazed in his vision. Credence sensed 3 more people like this in the shop. The front man said quietly, I need the wand behind you. Credence's peripheral vision found 3 other similar figures. I'll get it for you, he managed. Thank you, Aurelius, the voice said. Credence froze. He slowly looked up at the speaker's face. For a moment, the face blurred and then snapped into Grindelwald's features. Credence's pupils contracted. A red beam swept across the room. Then Johnson roared, and customers collapsed one after another. Credence turned toward the source of the red light and found Nagini standing there, wand in hand. They're acolytes, she said calmly. Reality snapped back. The man's face had shifted to someone else. Nagini had dealt with this before. She moved with composed decisiveness. Johnson, send these people to the Ministry of Magic. We're closing for the day. Understood, Snake Lady. Johnson hurried to gather the knocked-out individuals and get them to the ministry. John received word that acolytes had appeared at the Silverhand branch. Technically, they weren't true acolytes, only admirers of Grindelwald, but their actions were concerning. What unnerved John most was that one of them had called Credence by name. Aurelius Dumbledore? He murmured. Grindelwald. Seeds? What had Grindelwald planted? The mysteries around him only deepened, making him more impenetrable. The only certainty was that Grindelwald was still alive, pulling strings from somewhere. John wondered if Griffiths, the Polish minister of magic, was in league with him, or even Grindelwald himself. Dumbledore, who understood Grindelwald better than most, suspected the same. Neither had proof. Chapter 610. The only certainty was that Grindelwald was still alive. After the American branch joined the Saints, John began watching events in France more closely. Grindelwald, however, seemed to be after Credence and hadn't shown himself in France. Credence himself didn't know why Grindelwald was searching for him. What worried John more was that Grindelwald knew of Credence's awakening. Credence's supposed death half a century ago had not been the end. His apparent death had been the result of the Obscurus eroding his body. Normally, young wizards overwhelmed by an Obscurus would be consumed in childhood. That Credence had reached adulthood was already a miracle. John had used a massive, last-ditch spell as a seed to preserve his life. When Credence lost consciousness and lay close to death, the Obscurus was weakest. At that moment, John's magic flushed through him, displacing and weakening the Obscurus's hold, an extended, covert domestication. The process was painfully slow. John had planned it to culminate on the day he set the space-time anchor. But Credence had awakened early and gone looking for Nagini, missing John's letter. If Dumbledore hadn't received that letter, John might have been stuck in the past because of the mistake. Credence was unusually resilient and talented. He'd grown up enduring the Obscurus without any formal training. Under Grindelwald, he'd learned to use magic and could initially control the Obscurus, but its power was so great that it continued to eat away at him. Once he awoke, the Obscurus, having been weakened by John's magic, no longer affected him as strongly, and he gradually brought it under control. That method, though, wouldn't work for Ariana. She had never been able to manage her Obscurus. "It seems the answers to everything lie in Poland," John murmured, thinking of the Polish Minister of Magic. The truth would have to wait until Tongmi returned. Chapter 626, Second Invasion, Gauci retires. Poland had been unlucky in the international magical community. First Grindelwald appeared, then the Minister of Magic was physically attacked, and then criminals infiltrated the ministry. Silver Hand Fashion Architecture had been commissioned to rebuild the ministry, a fortunate contract. But not long after their work began, the ministry was invaded again. On the Department of Magical Games and Sports floor, a figure crouched under a desk, wand clutched, breath coming in ragged gasps. "This money's getting harder and harder to earn," he muttered. Listening to the shouts of pursuing aurors, Gauci, hidden beneath the desk, let out a relieved breath. "Luckily, I'm clever, but that Minister of Magic doesn't seem like someone I'd trust." He had slipped into the ministry by mingling with Silver Hand's employees and, while everyone's attention was on Tang Mi, had skirted into the Auror office. The plan was proceeding smoothly until he spotted the eye symbol on a door, a sign of Aurors. They almost caught him. He blasted through a wall to escape. The rebuilt ministry now resembled a maze, and Silver Hand Fashion Architecture had made so many modifications that it was hard to find an easy route out. Gauci pulled out the architectural blueprints he'd stolen and checked his position. "You're in the office for the detection and confiscation of counterfeit defensive spells and protective charms," he muttered. "Run right, take the staircase up, and on the last step there's a gap not covered by the anti-apparition charm." He memorized the route, fingered the stolen wand, and cursed softly. 3,000 galleons for this thing? The job was dangerous, but the pay had been too good to pass up. "After this one, I retire," he told himself. He poked his head out from under the desk and saw a wand thrust into the room. Protego. A shield charm snapped into place as an explosion ripped through the office. The desk disintegrated into splinters that flew toward the doorway, and a figure bolted out and raced for the exit. The aurors guarding the corridor were struck by the flying debris. Star threw up another shield charm to take the brunt, but a green spell streaked toward him. He dodged. The green light detonated behind them, plunging the area into darkness. Gauci followed the blast, racing toward the stairs. "Stop him," someone shouted. Star cast Lumos and spotted Gauci disappearing up the stairwell. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement gave chase. More money, more money. This time I need more." Gauci kept running, a green light sweeping past his hair. He raised his wand and conjured a desk to block the pursuing spells, whereupon the desk exploded into fragments. He slid into the stairwell. Permanent sticking charm. He slammed the charm on the door behind him and looked up. The staircase seemed endless. "No one told me these stairs were so long," he groaned, cursing the architect. As he sprinted, heavy thuds came from the other side of the stuck door. Star shoved an auror aside, pointed his wand, and shouted, "Blasting curse!" A hole exploded in the door. "Everyone, blast together!" he barked. The delays bought by Silverhand's intentionally chosen door were wearing thin. With several aurors combining their blasts, the stairwell's exit shuddered. Gaucy, panting as he climbed, knew he wouldn't have much time. He scrambled up the last dozen steps. When he reached the final 5, the door burst open. Star barged into the stairwell and fired a spell. Gaucy ducked and answered with a red bolt, using the spell to propel himself forward. "This time, I really need the money," he shouted, leaping onto the final step. Star was struck by the red light and disarmed. His wand flew from his right hand. He threw a silver spell with his left toward Gaucy anyway. Apparition! Gaucy vanished. Star caught his breath and climbed to the top step, eyes fixed on the spot where Gaucy had disappeared. "He won't get far. Issue a warrant," he said coldly. The aurors clambering up the stairs cursed the staircase's length in their minds. On the step, they found a drop of bright red blood. Star collected it with a wand. The wanted notice was issued quickly. The Polish Ministry of Magic blamed Silverhand fashion architecture. The ministry had been rebuilt with a flaw. Tang Mi, head of Silverhand, admitted the area in question hadn't been finished. Repairs had been planned for that day, but had been interrupted by the invasion, and the team had been restricted to the main hall. The ministry suffered the embarrassment. Gaucy stumbled into an alley in the Wizarding Quarter, clutching his chest. A silver blade was embedded in him, and blood seeped through his fingers. "I didn't expect one mistake to almost kill me," he rasped, forcing a bitter smile. He glanced at the wand in his hand, leaned against the wall, and started down a narrow lane. The immediate priority was to find his contact and hand over the wand. He hid behind a box and tried to steady his breathing. Each inhale felt as if it would tear his lungs. Blood loss blurred his vision. "This is dark arts," he thought. Wounds caused by dark arts artifacts were notoriously difficult to heal. Pulling the blade out rashly would likely make him bleed to death. As the footsteps of the search parties faded, he peered around the box. One thought alone kept him moving. More money. "Give me more. Double it! No, triple it!" he whispered to himself. He staggered toward the Silverhand Johnny store branch, but Star and a team already guarded the area. The pain was a constant, suffocating pressure. "Am I going to die here?" he wondered, eyelids heavy. Mustering his last strength, he made for a second rendezvous point. He couldn't apparate again. Doing so would drag the blade through his heart. He had to travel on foot. Evading patrols, he exhausted his remaining reserves just getting there. The ministry hadn't expected him to walk the whole way. The aurors he passed didn't notice him. At last he reached the rendezvous. He slumped against the bridge railing, vision swimming, when someone approached. Gaucy hoped it was his contact, otherwise he could not fight. The newcomer looked startled at his injuries. "Are you all right?" the young voice asked. Gaucy shot him an impatient look. "You try getting stabbed in the heart and see if you're all right," he snapped. The man fell silent. Gaucy drew his wand, leveled it at the young man's chest, and demanded, "Who do you serve?" "John Wick." "Bingo, you got it right." The wand slipped from Gaucy's fingers and clattered into the contact's hand. Gaucy raised his head, waved weakly, and managed, "Hurry, go. Tell my boss to add more money. Tell him I put all the money in the house beneath Weasel Mountain." His voice grew thinner, words coming in ragged breaths. "Half of it, converted into Muggle currency, donated to the Zolid Welfare Home, the other half sent to 78 Brown Scorpion Alley. For Amia. Tell the boss, it was very interesting, being by his side." His voice trailed off. The contact stared at the wand in his hand, expression empty. "Was it worth it? To pay with your life." The contact turned and left. Not long after he'd gone, Gaucy opened his eyes and pushed himself up, trembling. He could now confirm the man had been a genuine contact. He drew his wand and turned to face Star, who had silently appeared. A drop of blood skittered from the tip of the other wand and fell toward Gaucy. He smiled with something like resignation. "You will never catch a peace-loving, benevolent wizard." He closed his eyes and thought, "I really should retire." Then, collapsing backward, he plunged into the churning river. Chapter 627, The Wick Family's Trip, The Special Agent's Frustration. He went into the river. Star reported the result. Griffiths walked toward him slowly, hands clasped behind his back. His face was cold, the air around him oppressive enough to make one want to bow. Star lowered his head and added softly, "He was stabbed by the bloody blade. The Auror office will need time to confirm the missing items. That person used dark arts to blow up the office." Griffiths drew closer until his shadow fell over Star's feet. He placed a heavy hand on Star's shoulder. "You did very well, Star." The tension that had filled the air loosened like a thread being cut. Griffiths smiled. "Only like this can people see our resolve." He spoke quietly, his words measured. "Decaying capital is eating at this place. We need to show them the arrogance of capital. Unless the remnants of the ruin are cleared away, a new order cannot be established. We're building a truly free place for wizards, free from the constraint of houses, no longer forced to skulk in the dark." He leaned close and whispered into Star's ear, "We must awaken our countrymen." As the pressure from Griffith's hands steadied him, Star looked up and the fanaticism in his eyes burned bright. Griffiths glanced at the windmill hanging on the wall. "I once chased some greater good, to drag the magical world out of hiding," he said. "But I was wrong. It's the law of the jungle. The wizards of that new world must be sifted." He smiled, but it was not warm. "Unless the rotten flesh is excised, the disease cannot be cured. Some power-hungry men are deceiving the wizards. They call me a madman who wants to overthrow the world." Stopping in front of the windmill, his smile faded. "They use the injustices suffered by wizards to shield their own privileges. That is wrong." He picked up a lion ornament from the table and held it in his right hand, spreading his arms like a soaring eagle. "My benevolence will show in the new world. You will stand beside me, Star, and together we will see it." He set the ornament down, chuckled, and then, as if shrugging off an old skin, his hair went white and the brown of his eyes shifted into striking heterochromia. A new smile formed, the charming, dangerous smile of Grindelwald. "First," he said, "we will just let them see. We will make magic great again and pull it into the light." In the eddying river, Gaussy was carried by the current. At a bend, a gloved hand seized his collar and hauled him out. A hooded figure dragged him away from the water. Number 6, Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Morning sunlight spilled through the window and caught in the girl's golden hair, dusting the pristine white sheets in gold. Her skin was pale and her face angelic. The light dusted her eyelashes and made her look like a sleeping porcelain doll. On the bed, a brown teddy bear was hard at work, folding tiny garments with a diligence bordering on military precision. It packed shirts and socks, smoothing out creases before laying each piece neatly in the suitcase. The wardrobe was full. The lady of the house had bought too many clothes, and the brown bear paused, head tilted, considering. Its gaze landed on a pink bow-bearing teddy sitting on the shelf. The brown bear stared at it a moment, then the pink bear sprang off the shelf. There followed an absurd little scuffle. The brown bear tossed the pink one over its shoulder, executed a perfect German suplex, and used the pink bear briefly as a pretend punching bag. When it was done, it returned to its task with oblivious efficiency, packing, tucking away a small, inconvenient set of personal items, wiping a box pulled from under the bed until it shone, then placing it in the suitcase and snapping the lid shut. Finished at last, the bear clambered up to the headboard and gave the bedsheet a gentle tug to wake its human. Ariana felt the touch, instinctively grabbed the bear and pulled it into her arms. The toy squirmed once in her grasp, then turned its fixed eyes toward the pink bear it had just mauled. Despite having no expression, it nonetheless seemed a little smug. "Ariana, Daddy's waiting downstairs." Mrs. Wick knocked, then opened the door when no answer came and found her daughter still asleep. She saw the packed suitcase and guessed Ariana had been up late preparing. With a fond, indulgent smile, she went to the bed and called softly by her daughter's ear. "Ariana, we need to leave." Ariana stirred, snuggled to Mrs. Wick's arms, and replied in a soft, syrupy voice, "Mommy, I'll get up right away." Mrs. Wick felt like she was floating. Why have a daughter, indeed? With a son who'd been independent before he was 2, who woke up on his own and even sometimes made breakfast, Mrs. Wick had never had anyone to dote on. But now she had Ariana, who fulfilled all the indulgent fantasies a mother could have. She kissed her daughter's forehead and told her not to rush. "Ariana, wife, we're leaving," came Watson's loud voice up the stairs. Mrs. Wick froze. Watson bellowed again from below, wondering why no one answered. A moment later, he saw his wife descend the stairs with a blank expression. He hustled forward, enthusiasm bubbling. Is Ariana up yet? The flight's at 9. We still have some time. A moment later, Watson sat on the steps outside the front door, his phone buzzing. It was the airline. Mr. Wick, your booked flight is about to depart. Can you make it now? I'd like to ask, how much does a private jet cost? Huh? The man on the other end, an undercover special agent masquerading as an airline employee, froze for a beat and then recovered, secretly impressed. He'd expected the target might try to get rid of agents by chartering his own plane. This confirmed the man was ruthless and resourceful, top tier indeed. In response, the old special agent on the field pulled back his team. Everyone stop the plan. Go to the airport and disguise yourselves as cabin crew, he ordered. Then, into his phone in the most sincere tone he could manage. Okay, sir, we're running a special promotion right now. If you charter a plane now, you get a discount. On the plane that was about to take off sat an elderly man. Suddenly, as if on invisible command, the passengers began to stand and leave one by one. The old man blinked, bewildered. A flight attendant emerged and, without a hint of explanation, unbuttoned her jacket to reveal a plain shirt beneath, spoke sharply into an earpiece. Okay, director, I'm on my way, and walked off the plane. She was followed by others. In a matter of minutes, the cabin was empty except for the old man, who sat staring around at the abandoned seats, thinking, did he charter the plane? A team of operatives had infiltrated the airline through various channels and were now in position, waiting for Watson to arrive. In the car, Ariana held her bear tight. Watson held the big-headed gray owl Kiki curled inside a small travel cage. Why are you bringing an owl? Mrs. Wick asked from the driver's seat, puzzled. You don't understand. This is mutual appreciation, Watson said, shaking his head. During Christmas, it had been just him and Kiki depending on each other. How could he abandon that? Kiki gave an indignant chirp that clearly said, I was supposed to be going back to Dragon Valley for vacation. I do not need your mutual appreciation. Did you change flights? Mrs. Wick still didn't quite follow, but once Watson decided, there was nothing to be done. We got upgraded, he added casually. In the end, he hadn't bought a private jet. The three of them happily boarded a commercial flight and left. At the airline, the old special agents who had been on alert waited and waited, certain someone was about to purchase a whole plane, only to be outmaneuvered. Cold sweat broke out on one agent's brow. The other side had seen through them and used their own trick against them. Monstrous, they thought. Top tier. Terrifying. Watson shrugged off any triumphalism. Do you think buying a plane is like buying groceries? He said when asked later. The Wicks settled into first class. Ariana peered out the window, small mouth open, fascinated by the clouds. Mrs. Wick nursed a glass of champagne and asked, Where are we headed again? Watson let a golden snitch flutter from his hand, snatching it back a few inches later. Budapest, he said, Hungary. While his family vacationed, John had his own excitement at Hogwarts. On the Quidditch pitch, a familiar drama replayed, greasy-haired Malfoy's third battle against scarred Potter. Slytherin and Gryffindor were arguing again about who would get time on the pitch during the holidays. Words weren't enough. When the Gryffindors couldn't win, the boxing contingent led by Harry and Ron resorted to fists. Malfoy rarely fought fair, but he was a skilled brawler when he wanted to be. It always escalated into something more than a scheduling spat. John watched, amused. This is only the third day, and they've already fought 3 times, Daphne remarked. It looked as if they were training Quidditch as a side activity to their fighting, or vice versa. On the grass, Malfoy dodged Ron Weasley's long, flailing punches with the light-footed grace of someone used to skirting danger. Ron had the family's lanky build and a natural reach, good for boxing, if only he had the precision. The 6th and 7th year boys were more than a match for him, though. Malfoy's feet danced, his head a blur, and when he landed a blow to Ron's abdomen, it folded Ron to his knees. Dean lunged from behind with an illegal kick. Malfoy sidestepped, grabbed Dean's calf, and drove an elbow into it. Dean howled, was pulled forward, and shoved into a split. Pressing his palm down on the boy's head, Malfoy vaulted over and kicked Harry in the chest midair. He snatched Harry's collar and slammed him hard to the ground. Harry braced with his legs, twisted, and wrapped his arms around Malfoy's waist, trying to drive him forward. The move backfired. Malfoy lost his balance and was pushed down. Harry pounced, straddling him, raining punches. Malfoy rolled, hooked Harry aloft, and suplexed him, lifting and flinging him aside. Standing, Malfoy wiped the corner of his mouth and eyed the blood on his knuckles with a raised eyebrow. "A little improvement," he sneered, "but still too weak." Harry staggered up and was floored by Malfoy's charging punch. His glasses flew off, his head spun. Malfoy turned his head away and tossed, with all the arrogance he could muster, "Send them to the hospital wing. Slytherin gets an extra hour of training." Ginny spat a curse. "What's so great about bullying Harry? If you've got the guts, fight me." Her teammates, sweating, restrained her. Usually no one would take Ginny lightly, but Malfoy's moral compass was so rotten they feared he might actually try to take her on too. Ginny bristled and pushed through to help Harry up. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," Harry said, eyes fixed on Malfoy. "You can only show off here, Malfoy." "We've won 12 in a row," Malfoy replied with a smug chuckle. In the wizarding world, results were everything. Gryffindor tended to keep quiet about being beaten repeatedly. They preferred to save face. Daphne wondered why none of them were getting detention. John smiled wryly. "The school doesn't see non-magical fights as a huge offense, and Gryffindor won't go around broadcasting that 3 people lost to 1. Malfoy alone had the combination of skill, privilege, and temperament to bully others this way. He and Harry were like 2 sides of the same coin, bound together by fate. One was the boy who lived, the savior who grew up under constant attention and reverence. The other was the son of a Death Eater, raised in wealth but lacking the one thing most valued in their world, honor. Light and shadow, each defining the other. John couldn't fathom the exact mix of hatred, envy, and desire behind Malfoy's obsession with Harry. When they'd first met, Malfoy had even tried to befriend Harry. How different things might have been if Harry had responded to him instead of Ron. Still, John felt Malfoy hadn't changed at all. The Great Hall and the library became overloaded study zones. John spotted Astoria nearly tearing her potions book apart over an impossible assignment and wandered over. He glanced at the problem and said, casually, "Add some sleeping draught." Astoria's eyes widened. She seemed to forget John didn't have normal student obligations. He was a walking, breathing resource. The hall's attention shifted like the wind. Professors sometimes didn't even know what questions to ask this sort of student. He was a free learning tool, an oracle. When John sat down, Blaise approached with a beseeching book and a dozen others clustered behind him. "John, transfiguration? And potions. I'm taking alchemy as an elective." "John, runes, what about?" The Slytherin table buzzed. John could solve almost anything with a glance. Much of Hogwarts' homework was essay-based. He could supply the answer, and the others would flesh it out. Soon, wherever John went, someone had already fetched water and wiped the table for him. The chorus of questions rose until it almost drowned out everything else, but John's mind processed it like a supercomputer, fast, thorough, efficient. Even Slughorn admired the attention. Alone and selectively taught, the professor could handle a couple of bright students, but a flood of them was another matter. Saturday arrived, and Slughorn had invited John to one of his gatherings. John didn't break his promise. He carried a bottle of mead and slipped into the room as the banquet was underway. "John," Slughorn called, and all eyes turned. In an instant, people moved toward him with warm smiles. Those invited by Slughorn were the clever, connected sort. To be seen with the so-called Second King was to hint at influence. The room contained representatives of 2 enormous power blocks in Britain. The Silver Hand Alliance, John's creation during his Silver Hand days, was a coalition of powerful families, senior ministry officials, and social elites. Conversation there carried inside information few outside could ever hear. The Ancient Alliance, ostensibly a reconstituted Sacred 28 under the Malfoys, signaled another dimension of loyalty. The Pureblood network tied closer together. Discerning observers saw both as markers of John's reach, 2 pillars of influence that some had already dubbed the Second Dynasty. People leaned in, eager to be part of the mechanism that, with a king at its center, might soon sweep across Britain. Chapter 613. It wouldn't have been surprising if he became Minister of Magic one day. For most of the guests, this banquet might have been their only chance to interact with John. How could they not treasure it? "I'm very glad you could come," Slughorn said, somewhat overwhelmed as he accepted the mead John handed him. John smiled. Tit for tat. Slughorn had pulled out all the stops over the Merlin medal. John couldn't let him lose face. The focus of the evening shifted quietly as John conversed with the guests. Graceful, impeccably mannered, never the least bit improper. When the banquet ended, everyone seemed pleased. Soon after, John received a letter from the Ministry of Magic giving the date for his Merlin medal ceremony. Slughorn hadn't just hosted a lavish meal, he'd been repaying a favor. The people at the banquet weren't strangers, but leaders in their fields. Slughorn knew John's ambitions and had presented these people to him. Win them over, and John would gain much. Chapter 629, Slytherin, Gryffindor. The holidays passed quietly. As usual, by the time the students who had dutifully finished their homework announced they were going to have a blast, they would wake with a start and realize classes resumed the next day. The younger years wailed, the older ones were numb. "I think this holiday was just for homework," Suff Blaze complained mournfully. Exam week brought an even more urgent air. Everyone was studying hard, especially Astoria. She had gone almost neurotic with revision, muttering tactics under her breath as she memorized and rehearsed. John looked at her with pity. "I can already see the miserable state the Slytherin team will be in next year." Astoria would be captain, and with her current frame of mind, plus Slytherin's proverbial sword of Damocles hanging over them, she would likely be an even harsher leader than Malfoy. The team had already noticed. A faint smile on Astoria's lips sent a chill through her teammates. Goyle and Crabbe suddenly had twice the workload. They would have preferred playing Quidditch in a storm to more tutoring from Malfoy. They missed Theodore terribly. If they'd had a chance, they wouldn't have mocked anyone again. April slipped by quietly. Daphne made herself a study plan. She refused to lose to Hermione. Like the OWLs, the EWTs mattered. Their certificates would be crucial for future prospects. The whole 7th year felt the pressure. Students studied even in the common room. Slughorn still invited his favorites to the Slug Club. On the pitch, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff played a thrilling, closely matched Quidditch game. In another match, Gryffindor stormed ahead and beat Ravenclaw by 150 points. If Harry hadn't caught the golden snitch at the end, it might have gone either way. After being soundly beaten by Malfoy earlier, Ravenclaw had improved noticeably. That match between Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff was a back-and-forth scoring battle, Ravenclaw's tactics against Hufflepuff's resilience. The game ran from morning into afternoon. In the decisive moment, a bludger struck Hufflepuff's chaser, and Ravenclaw's seeker seized the snitch. Hufflepuff left unwilling to accept defeat, but the audience gave both teams warm applause. Spectators were the day's real winners. The victory only heightened anticipation for the mid-May final. Hogwarts arch-rivals, Slytherin and Gryffindor. Would Slytherin hold the throne, or would Gryffindor reclaim it? Gryffindor had enjoyed moments of glory, and if they could end Slytherin's dominance, that year would be legendary. Harry wanted that more than anyone in his final year. Since joining the Quidditch team in his first year, he had treated defeating Slytherin as a personal mission. He'd been accepted exceptionally young and proven himself on the pitch, but he'd never managed to lead Gryffindor to topple Slytherin. He wasn't willing to let things end that way, and Malfoy was just as unwilling to be bested. The two were natural rivals, both training for the final match, and the whole school watched, waiting to see who would prevail. Time moved forward in small increments. John spent long hours at the Constellation Society and had almost finished absorbing the dark book he'd acquired. The book, a distillation of Herpo the Fowl's perverted wisdom, contained dangerously useful knowledge, especially on time. It treated soul and time as two forbidden subjects. The sections on curses and blood magic opened John's eyes. He recognized examples he'd seen before, and for the first time, things clicked into place. Using the body as a vessel to imprison time. John tested the idea and cut his palm. The wound visibly knitted itself together. This was different from the time corridor, which rewound an object or person to a prior state. This method simply accelerated healing, an almost immortal regenerative ability, but it was perilous. Careless use could accelerate the body's aging. It amplified internal activity to spur a self-healing almost like regression. Dangerous, to say the least. This book is bound to danger, he muttered, eyeing the dark volume. It was a Horcrux, after all. Herpo's soul lurked inside, feeble and divided. If destroying the Horcrux didn't mean destroying the book itself, John might have destroyed it already. He had kept it only because it still held value. "Tell me, what do you want to be?" he asked the book out loud. He sensed fear emanating from the pages. Of all the fragments Herpo had scattered, some no longer resembled their original maker. One fragment had become obsessed with resurrecting and turning into another Helbo, while another was ridiculously weak and cowardly. Helbo's soul had developed its own ideas. The pieces had become independent personalities, far from the original intent of perfect, remediless immortality. John's expression hardened. He spread his hand over the cover and spoke coldly. "Serve me, or perish here." Veins of a sigil, lines and circles forming an arbor, appeared on the back of his hand and flowed from him onto the book. The binding was irresistible. The trembling soul inside the Horcrux broke. A frail, aged voice whispered, "I am willing to serve you." It chose servitude rather than oblivion. The sigil branded the book. Any hint of defiance or thought of betrayal would trigger its undoing. Disloyalty would mean instantaneous destruction. John chuckled. "You made the right choice." He closed the book and tucked it away. He also picked up the little dragon that had been banished to a table and had been noisily provoking the star spirits beneath it, then set the creature aside. Glancing at his pocket watch, he murmured, "The match is about to begin," and stood up. The little dragon, still chattering and unaware, didn't notice John leave. The star spirits beneath it, however, were already flexing their power. Only when the door closed did the dragon belatedly look at the empty spot and, furious, shout, "Hit it!" One star spirit roared in response, and then a swarm of them scrambled up onto the table. Chapter 614. Here, brutal group beatings were treated like righteous acts. A star spirit gave a plaintive roar. One of them transformed into a star spirit guard, grabbed a chair and raised it as if to smash it down. No, calm down. Calm down," another star spirit said, stopping the guard just in time. The guard scratched his head, realizing this had gone too far. He reverted to his usual form and joined the others in the scuffle. The little dragon found an opening, lunged, and fled. The long-awaited traditional match between Slytherin and Gryffindor was about to begin. In the Great Hall, Malfoy gave Harry a thumbs up, then slowly dragged his finger across his throat. Harry glared back. Ron pressed a hand to Harry's shoulder and whispered, "Don't take the bait." Harry swallowed his anger. Hermione came over to cheer, and Lavender approached Ron, looking shy. "Good luck, Ron," she murmured, then scurried away. Dean nudged Ron and said with a grin, "Looks like your moment's come." Ron blinked, baffled, then felt an odd, pleasant warmth spread through him and grinned like an idiot. The time for the match approached. Both teams headed for the Quidditch pitch. At the foyer exit, Goyle and Crabbe shoved the Gryffindor players around. Harry had to hold Ginny back. "Don't fall for it. We'll sort this out on the pitch," he warned. Ginny's face still looked ready to cast a straight, shattering spell on the nearest big oaf. Malfoy swaggered by and sneered, "Get ready to beg your godfather, Potter." Harry clenched his fists. Chapter 630, The Final Battle. Let's put an end to it. In the Slytherin locker room, Malfoy gave an uncharacteristically earnest speech. The team expected the usual taunts about making their lives miserable, but he surprised them. "I'll admit I've been harsh these past few days," he began. "For my own selfish reasons, I put you through brutal training, more than any student should have to take. I want to thank you." He looked each of them in the eyes. "Quidditch isn't a one-person game. Even the best seeker needs teammates. I'm not the strongest seeker. In my matches against Harry Potter, he always comes out on top. It's excellent teammates who make Slytherin win." The room fell silent. Crabbe forced out, "If it weren't for you, Draco, we wouldn't have these skills." "No," Malfoy said with a sigh. "It's because of your effort." "You work harder than any of us," Goyle protested. "You're always the first on the pitch and the last to leave. We know you do it for our own good." "Really? You all believe that?" Malfoy asked, surprised. They nodded. Goyle added, "We know the captain means well. Win or lose, you've been a great captain." Good, good, Malfoy nodded, satisfied. Then his voice turned sharp. Now, get into your jerseys. If I'm tied to the pillar of shame, none of you get off easy. The earlier sincerity dissolved into the familiar Malfoy taunt. This is the last match. Make me unhappy, and I'll make you unhappy too. Put on your jerseys. Walk onto the pitch. We are Slytherin. Victory is our prize. We'll take it by any means necessary. In the Gryffindor changing room, Harry rallied his team. We just need to play this game well and give it everything. We've pushed them to the brink so many times. This time it's different. We will win. In the name of Gryffindor, we'll overthrow that throne and become champions, someone shouted. For Gryffindor, they roared back. The room buzzed with sober, steady confidence. This year's Gryffindor was more mature. They had the best chasers and the best seeker. Ron had been stellar all season and had moved into the keeper position, making huge contributions. Dean, newly back on the chaser line, coordinated smoothly with his ex-Ginny. We have every reason to win, Harry said, sweeping his teammates with a look. Let's go out there and leave no regrets. They answered with solemn nods. The stands swelled with red and green. The crowd's cheers roared. First out, Gryffindor. Their captain, Harry Potter, looks determined. This is the final battle, the end of a fate, a commentator announced. Ernie Macmillan's voice followed, breathless with excitement. Slytherin is out, Captain Draco Malfoy. This is his final match this year. Reliable rumors say he's put his teammates through inhumane training. Every team member has been to the hospital wing. It's outrageous. Malfoy, basking in the applause, caught that and shot a murderous glare at Ernie. Nonsense, he muttered. Astoria hasn't been there. Goyle and Crabbe and the rest of Slytherin fell quiet. Well, everyone except Astoria, it seemed, had been to the hospital wing. Madame Hooch was the referee. As tradition demanded, the two captains shook hands. They held on a moment too long, as if their hands might stay clasped forever. Hooch barked at them until they released each other. Play! Both seekers immediately climbed to a high vantage, scanning the sky for the golden snitch. Astoria takes the quaffle first. She's flying her firebolt straight for the Gryffindor goal. What? Ginny Weasley appears and steals the quaffle from Astoria, the commentator cried. The match erupted with ferocious energy. Astoria had been in possession, but Ginny swooped out of nowhere and snatched it. Astoria spun to reclaim it. The two clashed and jostled in the air. Astoria, now Ginny. She passes. Dean Thomas grabs it. Wait, who's that? Yes, a bludger. Dean's hit. The quaffle changes hands again. The game swung wildly. Harry saw Ginny take the quaffle and smiled, then watched it trade hands moments later. Goyle and Crabbe unleashed the bludgers, targeting Ginny. She dodged, buying Astoria time. Astoria accelerated, feinted past Ron, and launched the quaffle into the bottom right hoop. Slytherin scores first, Ernie shouted hoarsely, his voice cracking with excitement. The back and forth was fiercer than anyone could remember. Malfoy smirked. Astoria's the best? No way Ginny's the best, Harry shot back. Their eyes met, sparks flashing. Ginny counterattacked, teaming with Dean to drive towards Slytherin's goal. Beautiful. I love this redhead. Her throws are art. Ernie gushed, pounding the table behind him. Professor McGonagall, nearby, could barely conceal a smile. The crowd's cheers nearly drowned out everything else. In the Slytherin stands, a boy named John spotted Luna, wrapped in a snake scarf and wearing a lion hat, cheering for Slytherin 1 minute and Gryffindor the next. This has to be the most exciting match Hogwarts has seen in 100 years, Ernie declared. Will Slytherin make it 13 wins in a row, or will the roaring lion topple them? This isn't just a match, it's destiny, someone else cried. On the pitch, Astoria's speed and Ginny's skill, Goyle and Crabbe's relentless bludger attacks, and Ron's stubborn iron wall defense kept the score tight. The lead never exceeded 20 points. It swung back and forth. All that stood between each team and victory was the golden snitch. Whoever caught it would take everything. High among the clouds, the two seekers searched with hawk-eyed focus. Malfoy leveled a cold look at Harry. Potter, he said, let's put an end to it. Chapters 6 and 15. Harry smiled, full of fighting spirit. Exactly what I intended. Let the entanglement that had started in first year be severed here. You are not the savior, and I am not the youngest Death Eater. Our destinies have crossed again, but now they would split into two straight lines that would never meet. Gold flashed in an instant. Two figures moved at once, familiar, practiced. Second year, third year, fifth year, clash after clash, tangle after tangle. They had been chaos to one another. It was time to separate. This final battle would mark an end. Malfoy and Potter, Slytherin and Gryffindor, Firebolt against Firebolt, Malfoy and Potter. Green and red braided together as the two riders weaved, shoulders colliding, neither willing to give an inch. The sight held everyone captive. Diving from high altitude, Malfoy tried a dirty elbow that nearly knocked Harry off his broom. As an old rival, Harry answered in kind, using a central axis spin to switch to Malfoy's right. Malfoy was right-handed. Harry's position had been denying him his dominant side. The one who knows you best is often your greatest opponent, especially an old one. "You've gotten smarter, Potter," Malfoy laughed. Harry returned the smile. Golden light flashed beneath Slytherin's goal. Malfoy glanced at Goyle, who was winding up a bludger, and smirked. "Too bad you forgot. This is a team game." He pressed his weight to his firebolt. Goyle swung with everything he'd got. A bludger rocketed toward Harry's face. Harry dove out of the way, his course skewed. The bludger shaved his hair as it flew past. Seizing the moment, Malfoy slammed his firebolt to full speed and became a green arrow. Just as he reached for the golden snitch, the tiny golden insect shot straight up. Malfoy snapped his broom along the goalpost and propelled himself toward the sky. Harry adjusted and chased. They chased from sky to ground and back again, red and green braided through clouds and stands. Harry, having copied one of Malfoy's signature moves, rammed into him. Malfoy answered with a central axis spin, swapped to Harry's right, and raised an eyebrow in challenge. Ernie's voice, hoarse, barked over the crowd. Tense and exciting. Harry Potter is in hot pursuit. Both seekers have found the golden snitch. The score is now 150 to 140. Ginny Weasley breaks through and ties it at 150 apiece. "Who will end the game?" another commentator shouted. "Harry Potter can't let Draco Malfoy catch the snitch. There's still a gap in the total score." Everyone rose to their feet. Professor McGonagall clasped her hands together and prayed. As Malfoy reached out, a bludger flew past, missing his broom by inches. A bludger! The bludger saved Gryffindor. The crowd went wild. Ernie bounced up on the table before McGonagall hauled him back down. Malfoy dodged and lost sight of the snitch. Harry caught sight of it to Malfoy's right and made a risky decision, the Wronski feint. He pulled his firebolt down and shot off in a completely different direction without looking back. Malfoy nearly turned to follow, but seeing Harry's move, pursued him without hesitation. Both veered away from the snitch. The tiny golden object blinked and was gone. By the time Malfoy realized he'd been tricked, he couldn't find it. Ginny ducked a bludger and barked at Dean, "Get that damn ball in the goal!" Dean roared and unleashed a fierce shot that kissed the goalpost and squeaked through. 10 points, but not nearly enough. Ginny knew they had to pile on points while the Seekers were occupied. She organized another attack. Astoria, sensing the plan, shouted, "Block her!" Ginny starts to move. Oh no! Astoria gets the quaffle and two beaters close in. Goyle and Crabbe swung their bludgers to drive off the two closing chasers. Ginny's defense was a hair late. Astoria charged alone. Ron, fired up, bellowed, "Come on!" Astoria read him coolly. As she neared the goal, she feinted toward the bottom right to bait Ron, then lobbed the quaffle toward the center. The ball sighed toward the hoop. Ron dove, pushing his broom, his fingers just nicking the quaffle and knocking it away. A smile spread across his face, then froze. He'd left his broom leaning, and the upward force that had kept him aloft vanished. His legs dangled. He began to fall. The stands went silent. Ron flailed as he plunged. Just before he would have met the pitch, Dean grabbed him and hauled him safely back to his broom. "Well done, Ron," Dean shouted, sending him back up. The rescue lit a blaze through Gryffindor. Ron's desperate save roused them. This was a match they had to win. Everyone answered in kind. Ginny, seeing her brother risk everything, poured in 3 times her usual strength. She broke through again. The gap shrank, 20 points, but still not enough. Ginny and Dean combined, passing to the third chaser, who scored cleanly, 30 points. The Gryffindor section erupted. Astoria knew she had to shift the momentum. While the Seeker might end the game, the Chasers wrote the story between the lines. With coordinated attacks, the scores kept tightening. Time wore on. Morning became afternoon. The sky darkened and rain threatened. Fatigue crept over players on both sides. The scoreboard read 190 to 270. The Weasley family roared with renewed vigor. Slytherin trailed by 80 points. It seemed impossible, absurd, for the house that had reigned for 12 consecutive victories to be at risk of losing today. Astoria and Ginny met each other's eyes across the pitch, both burning with determination. "Pass me the ball. I'll break through Gryffindor's defense," Astoria called. It was the first time she demanded possession in a match, and everyone knew she meant business. Ron stood like a guardian at the goal, feeling oddly blessed after his save, clear-headed and fierce. He swore, "Not one is getting through." Astoria figured this moment had turned into a duel of spear versus shield. If she couldn't beat the shield, she'd become the spear herself. Both sides unleashed everything they had. Attacks and counters sliced across the sky, goals traded in fast succession. The scoreboard changed again, 210 to 300. Possession flipped constantly. A thunderclap heralded the downpour. Heavy rain came as promised, but nobody left the stands. They watched, drenched, as the battle on the pitch became even more intense. And then, under a flash of lightning, the golden snitch reappeared. Chapter 616. Draco and Harry collided again and again in the air. Both were giving everything they had. Their speed would have been top tier even in a professional Quidditch match. Draco threw an elbow. Harry bumped him back. It ended as a stalemate. They spiraled higher and higher until the crowd could barely make them out. The golden snitch darted through the clouds, flashing like lightning as it slipped in and out of view. "I'll get it," Harry shouted. "No, you won't," Draco countered. Neither would give ground. On the pitch below, spear clashed against spear. Ginny and Dean's coordinated plays steadily narrowed the gap. Astoria forced the pace, harrying the opposition. The scoreboard blinked 250-390, a difference of 140. For Gryffindor to win, they still needed to make up 210 points. How familiar that challenge felt. This time, though, the roles were reversed. Both chasers burst out of the clouds, but the snitch had vanished. Their eyes scanned the gray sky. Suddenly, it shot down through the rain like a streak of gold. The torrents stung their faces like pebbles. The score updated, 206 to 410, a difference of 150. Lightning cleaved the sky. Draco barely dodged a fork of it. "Keep going," Harry thought. He needed to end the match as quickly as possible. This had become a test of stamina and the hope of everyone watching. The thunder and rain blurred time. Astoria's goggles cracked from the impact of a stray bludger. She tore them off, threw them away, and pressed on, gasping. Up to now, most of the effective plays had come from her. Ron had become a stalwart, blocking every shot except those aimed straight at him. Ginny was exhausted too, but with Ron and Dean backing her up, she had not been pushed to the same breaking point as Astoria. The wheels of fate had turned. Next year's captains were, in all but name, clashing here in a fierce duel. 300 to 500. The scoreboard read a difference of 200. Ginny, betting everything on a single gamble, charged and was intercepted by Astoria. The two met in a narrow corridor of air and collided without yielding. Both girls were thrown from their brooms. The quaffle wobbled and fell into the goal. "Go, Harry!" Ginny's roar cut through the rain. Lightning split the darkness. The snitch plummeted, and two figures dove with it. Astoria refused to call a timeout. "Go score!" she shouted to her Slytherins. Slytherin surged at Gryffindor. Harry reached out. His finger almost brushed the snitch. Then Draco's voice came through the storm. "You know, Potter," he called. There was no tension in his tone now, only a fierce joy in the chase. "I'm a Malfoy," he grinned. "I give my all, by any means necessary." With that, Draco changed his style. He pushed off his broom with both feet and leapt. Everyone gasped. That leap made the golden glint, the snitch, seem to vanish. Draco's broom went out of control and careened out of bounds. Draco himself spread his arms and shouted, a wild sound swallowed by the rain. He was falling, thousands of feet, and no one could quite believe he dared it. Seeing Draco still hurtling down, Harry didn't hesitate. He reversed, dove, and flew toward him. Voices in the stands rose in shocked cries. Astoria tried to go in for the rescue, but a bludger hit the tail of her broom and she lost control. "Is he insane?" Ron cursed. Draco was plummeting fast. Just as it seemed he would strike the pitch, another figure slammed into him. Their brooms spun wildly. Then the two of them crashed together, skidded through the mud, and lay on their backs, soaked and gasping. For a moment there was silence, then laughter burst out of them both. Someone raised a hand, and gold flashed in the gloom. The snitch, the little golden thing that had slipped from their grasp so many times, was finally pinched between fingers. "Game over!" someone shouted. Draco held the snitch in his hand and laughed, a laugh full of triumph. He had caught it right in front of Harry. He choked on rain and laughter, then, exhausted, simply lay down on the pitch. "You won," Harry said at last, his glasses slick with rain, voice complicated. "You always win." "No, Harry," Draco replied, sitting up and staring at the snitch in his palm. "You always win." This was Draco's first personal victory against Potter. Slytherin had beaten Harry Potter. And it had come about because Harry had thrown himself after Draco, saving him. Harry scrambled to his feet and offered a hand. Draco looked startled for a moment, then smiled in relief and pulled him up. The hand Harry had never been offered in first year was grasped now. Draco said earnestly, "A brilliant game." "Yes, very brilliant." Harry glanced toward his teammates as they began descending from the sky. This time, it wasn't Gryffindor who had won, yet the whole school rose to its feet. Applause thundered down. No one cared only about the result. They were applauding the sheer brilliance of the contest. Ernie wiped his eyes, choking on emotion. This match, Slytherin won. It was one of the most brilliant games Hogwarts has ever seen. Others echoed him. Draco Malfoy's all-out struggle, Harry Potter's final rescue. A peak showdown. Even Professor McGonagall had tears on her face. She loved matches that made people cheer and sob in equal measure. Severus Snape wanted to call it brilliant too, but not quite brilliant enough to merit a page in Hogwarts, a history. The whole school watched as the two rivals shook hands on the field. Just then, Draco's mouth curved into a mischievous smile. He pulled Harry's hand so hard, it sent Harry flying and landing back in the mud. The applause cut off mid-wave. Draco drawled in a deliberately obnoxious tone, "The loser must look up to the winner." Harry's temper flared. "You bastard! I just saved you!" But it was the last match, and he let himself go. He leapt like a hungry tiger and tackled Draco. As they rolled and wrestled in the mud, the stands erupted again, this time with cheers for Harry. "Take him down, Harry!" they shouted. "Kill that damned Slytherin! Punch him in the face!" It turned into a full-on brawl in the middle of the pitch. Eventually, the two deans dragged them apart and took them off, to detention. Thus ended a 7-year entanglement in a way that was equal parts moving and ridiculous. The golden snitch, the final punctuation to it all, stayed with Draco. To him, it was proof of Potter's failure. John, watching, couldn't help but give him a thumbs up. No wonder he was the most infuriating. The match was the talk of the school for days. Astoria and Ginny had started something, too. The two girls would snort derisively at each other whenever they crossed paths in the Great Hall. Ron, spent from his outburst and the adrenal crash that followed, ended up in the hospital wing for 3 days. Chapter 617. It wasn't until he checked that he realized his body was covered in bruises from being hit by bludgers. Before, he hadn't felt any pain. Now he winced. On the bright side, Lavender kept sending him secret glances and frequently visited her little Ron in the hospital wing. Ron liked being fussed over and fed. Hermione watched from the side, expression flat, and muttered, "I'm going to be sick." Harry felt a little queasy from the public displays of affection too, but when he imagined Ginny treating him the same way, he had to admit the idea made him smile like an idiot, which only made Hermione more exasperated. John, meanwhile, watched Malfoy again, scowling at the way the boy had been so pleased with himself. After beating Harry once, Malfoy acted as if he had conquered the world. He never tired of boasting that he'd snatched the golden snitch right in front of Harry. Goyle and Crabbe looked bored every time the story came up, but they had to bow to Malfoy's showmanship. The last match had finished, and the final class period of the day had come. The library began to fill. It was the usual haunt for students, all except John. He sent away the professor, who had come to consult him about alchemy. Basil flew back to him with an arrow clamped in his beak. John frowned and took the arrow from him. "Didn't I tell you to deliver the soul potion? Why did you bring an arrow back?" Holding the shaft, he examined it. The material was unusual, extremely tough. He assumed it was his father's prank. Basil had probably just picked up whatever had flown by. John tossed the arrow aside and glanced at the gray level 7 on his panel. He had hit a bottleneck and needed to find other ways to grow stronger. A black, smoke-like substance moved over his fingertips. He stared at it and whispered, "Obscurus, darkness." To break the limit, he needed the help of more powerful forces. He already held magic near the top of the pyramid. Pushing past this felt like starting from zero. The Obscurus crawled into his palm, and John crushed it. The explosion of power made the Constellation Society tremble and several star spirits sway. He thought aloud, "Power of darkness." A black gleam flashed in his eyes as he remembered the endless dark of that other mysterious magical world. If he could get there again, he might break this bottleneck, but the chance of returning was slim. Besides magic, he mused, I'll need other kinds of power. He looked up at the starry dome and absently rubbed his ring. Chapter 633, Dark Medium, Energy Exams began the first week of June. For the previous fortnight, John had barely left the Constellation Society's doorway. A legend grew in Slytherin about him, a night demon who only appeared at night. Someone claimed a student sneaking out to challenge Filch had run into John in a corridor and fainted from fright. The story made every Slytherin nervous. John had no idea who started it. He was just trying to avoid being seen when he went for a shower. People turned his normal comings and goings into something supernatural. After drying his hair and returning to the Constellation Society, he told himself, there must be a medium to draw energy from other places. He looked at his golden scales. A short stay in Dragon Valley under the moon had let some constellation power flow into him, but it wasn't enough. He needed more to push through. He had no clear idea what level 8 would feel like. Among those he'd met, only Dumbledore might be close, but that old man was unpredictable and unlikely to spar for the sake of training. Grindelwald was presumed dead, though rumors persisted. In 7 years in the magical world, John had only encountered 4 people who might reach that level: Dumbledore, Lord Voldemort, Grindelwald, and his professor Nicholas Flamel. Flamel, with 6 centuries of magic, might not be the absolute strongest, but he was among the most seasoned. Then there was Merlin, whose existence was almost mythic. He'd also considered the silver dragon Heimdall in the dragon graveyard, a 1,000-year-old dragon and a top-tier being, but Heimdall's age and prophetic sight had weakened him, and John couldn't easily strike at a Dragon King's subjects. He sighed. I'll have to start with other sources. Constellation and darkness. He could draw from the former, and the latter, that otherworldly power he'd touched, lingered in his memory. The problem was how to cross boundaries between worlds, or at least draw energy from another dimension. Magic is linked, he thought. Maybe there's a way to siphon it. He needed experiments. He sent Hagrid to search for dark-natured materials. Hagrid scratched his head but accepted the task. He trusted John had his reasons. 7 days before exams, Hagrid returned with a collection of curious things. To a magizoologist, they were neither good nor bad, but only cruel wizards would think to exploit them. Among the items were rare bicorn scales. John listened as Hagrid gave a rambling lesson. Bicorns were creatures that disliked light, the dark counterpart to unicorns, and in legend were associated with impurity. Their scales were incredibly hard and fire-resistant, similar to dragonhide. John didn't ask where Hagrid had found them. Bicorns hadn't been seen in Britain for a century. With materials in hand, John began his work. He wanted to fashion a medium that could draw energy from other dimensions. He read through a book on dark magic and curses. Curses could be considered a form of dark energy. After several days of effort, he carved ancient elven script into a bicorn scale and fashioned it into a charm which he hung around his neck. He closed his eyes and walked out to an isolated island in the ocean. The sky was full of stars, the only sound the surge of the tide. The boundless silence felt like it could swallow a person whole. The dark book floated before him, and the light around him began to dim. Obscurus energy in his body overflowed, hungry and greedy. As the script on the bicorn charm began to fade, the scale itself darkened, warping the air around it like a black hole. John raised his right hand. His palm went a grayish-white as black threads crawled along the charm and into him. He pushed his search deeper and felt a black thread take root inside him. When he opened his eyes, they were different. His skin looked washed out, pupils narrowing to vertical slits of pitch black. From his right hand, black patterns crept up his arm and across his chest. "Back!" John barked. The shout broke the patterns. The magic in his body expelled the absorbed energy, and after a few breaths, his skin color returned to normal. He closed his eyes, drew in a long breath, and opened them again. Everything seemed at peace. He felt a subtle uptick in his power, slight but real. The bicorn charm returned to its original look. John stood up, stretched, and said, "It seems it worked." He hadn't suffered from absorbing the dark power. The obscurus was, in essence, a mass of converging darkness, and his own obscurus could naturally consume more darkness. That meant he could use it to draw on darker energies without being overwhelmed, provided he kept control. This method could only be used by John. Anyone else would be throwing themselves into a pool of poison. He felt a thrill at seeing his progress renewed, but he did not overindulge. He transformed into a golden dragon over 100 feet long, basking in the starlight on the isolated island. He did not squander the power of the constellation either. The starlight itself seemed to bend as it approached him. By the time it had crossed light years to reach him, much of its force had already been drawn in. If there had been centaurs on that island, they would have been utterly bewildered. Back at Hogwarts, the last 3 days before exams had turned the school into a hive of anxious activity. The pressure of NEWT week had students wiping sweat off their brows in the library. Madam Pince kept a strict eye on every whisper. Any brat who made too much noise was dealt with mercilessly. Crabbe, who'd fallen asleep snoring, was dragged out and caned with a broom. Goyle, roused from his doze, dared not close his eyes again. The 7th-year exams would last 2 weeks, not so different from the OOLs, and like those, Ministry invigilators would be present. Malfoy was cramming Transfiguration, Daphne was concentrating on defense against the dark arts, and Neville was polishing his potions skills. The whole school was working hard. John, however, was being interviewed while holding his new Merlin medal. One reporter asked, bluntly, "Many potion masters speculate, do you think the werewolf curse can be cured like the blood curse?" It was a loaded question. John didn't know which thoughtless soul had asked it. He chuckled. Werewolves, like vampires, have a long history in the magical world. With the wolfsbane potion suppressing the ferocity of transformation, most werewolves no longer lose control. He didn't claim to have solved everything. Instead, he reassured people that werewolves were manageable. Once their transformations were controlled, they were no different from ordinary people, except, perhaps, that on the night of a full moon, a friend might turn into a hairy wolf. Then again, if there weren't any quirks, what would make the magical world magical? Who knew? Maybe someday drinking with a werewolf during a full moon wouldn't be so strange. After the interview, John headed back to Hogwarts accompanied by Slughorn. Along the way, they ran into acquaintances, including Griselda Marchbanks. The venerable examiner, who had once overseen Dumbledore's exams, beamed at John. "You are the most talented wizard I have ever seen," she said earnestly. "I hope to see your exceptional magic again in these exams." "There will be a chance," John replied with a smile. Marchbanks, who had tested 3 greats in her long life, Dumbledore, Tom Riddle, and now John, was delighted. Even in the long-lived magical world, she was ancient, and she teased Slughorn about his own exam history before they parted. The old man could not help but grumble at having nearly bungled a transfiguration in his youth. After that exchange, they returned to Hogwarts. With only a day left until the first papers, the tension tightened. The day before the exams, John decided it was better to relax than cram. By the edge of the Black Lake, he watched tentacles rise and drink in the constellation like thirsty things. Not a single drop of the golden liquid was wasted. Every strand of light was absorbed by the appendages. The tentacles swayed and sank back beneath the water. On the shore, 2 figures were racing wildly, each pulling a suit of armor mounted on a wooden board tied to a rope. The armor squealed and thrashed. "Charge, little dragon! I'm a dragon knight! Woohoo!" The wooden stick attached to one armor screamed. "Overtake him, barbarian," the other urged. Malfoy and Neville were on their second lap. Neville ran with steady breathing, as solid as a boulder. Malfoy was beginning to struggle by the end of the second turn. The armor he'd been pulling made a great din, its wooden arm flailing. Malfoy had started the challenge himself, no doubt feeling cocky after a recent victory over Harry, but by the third lap he barked at his armor to shut up. By the 10th lap his legs trembled. Neville, barely breathless, kept an effortlessly superior pace. "It's that armor! He's added weight!" Malfoy accused, glaring at the scrap of metal. The armor, insulted, gave a thumbs up and protested like a cheeky child. Malfoy kicked it aside and turned on the other suit. "What do you want to say?" he demanded. "I don't want to say anything," the other armor muttered, shaking its head. John walked over and, calm as ever, said, "Don't worry, everyone will be gathering at the Constellation Society later." The meaning was clear. There's no reason to pick anyone up. Hurry over. Malfoy looked put out, but kept his bravado. "Fine. Don't say I didn't win fairly," he snapped. Even the armor couldn't hide its admiration. John stopped paying attention to Malfoy's bullying. Today was the Constellation Society meeting, and everyone was expected to attend before the exams began. In the Constellation room, Heinrich fussed for Jin to sit beside him. Fleur looked troubled. Cedric sighed, "You're almost graduating." He was a couple of years older than John, already showing the wanderlust of someone likely to become an explorer. Percy smiled at Fleur. "You're going to work in Britain. Do you want a post at the ministry?" "Forget it," Fleur said with a sigh. "My family wants me in the French Ministry of Magic, and Roland keeps coming to find me." "Bill hasn't forgotten you," Percy said. "He still hasn't found a new girlfriend." At the mention of Bill, Fleur faltered. Astoria, curious, asked, "Fleur, do you still like Bill?" "Maybe." Fleur propped her chin on her hand, the French beauty sighing softly. "I don't know." Their relationship with Bill had been good. If not for Mrs. Weasley, they might already have married. Percy didn't press. Some things could only be settled by Bill's own initiative. Percy went to a cabinet, produced a bottle of wine, and poured for everyone. "I'm getting married," he announced casually. Who's getting married?" a chorus of voices asked. The door swung open, and Malfoy glided in, arrogant as ever. Percy answered, "Penelope and I, she's been working at the Muggle Reconciliation Committee since graduating." "Congratulations," John said with a chuckle. "I remember Penelope Clearwater. She's clever." Malfoy sat next to Astoria with a smirk. "I thought you'd find a pure blood," he drawled. Percy's face went stern. "I am not someone who uses marriage as a bargaining chip." "All right," Malfoy shrugged, grinning. "My father said you're quite popular with the purebloods." Penelope, of course, was a half-blood. With John taking his seat, every member of the Constellation Society had arrived. His eyes swept the room. Heinrich devout, Jin fidgeting slightly, Percy composed, Cedric laughing heartily, Daphne staring at John, Neville moved, Malfoy haughty, Astoria attentive. Fleur smiled at John. "After many twists and turns, we are together again," John said, raising his glass. "Like the stars in the sky," someone replied. "Even if we part, we still see each other's light." "In this final time we part," John continued, "some of us will teach at Hogwarts. Others will seek speed and glory on the Quidditch pitch. Some will seek adventures in distant forests or compete in public office. And some will go abroad to become well-known figures. However, we are like the stars in the sky. No matter how things change, we will always be tightly connected. Constellation Society. We take our name from the constellation, shining brightly across the magical world. John Wick's voice was warm as he looked over everyone. "Parting is not the end," he said with a smile, meeting familiar faces around the table. "Remember, the Constellation Society will always exist in one form or another. When needed, in danger, in joy." He raised his glass and chuckled. "Don't forget any of this. Cheers!" The members of the Constellation Society drank. It was their banquet, a time to talk about the future and swap stories about the past year. Fleur told Astoria about the handwritten letters Gabrielle made each year. Cedric recounted the excitement of his adventures to Neville. Percy and Chang argued over the shifting political landscape. Malfoy tried, awkwardly, and ever so persistent, to win Astoria back, only to be shooed away. Daphne, flushed and nervous, sought Fleur's advice about romance. Heinrich sat to John's left, holding his wine. "I think we need to clink glasses," John Wick said with a grin. "Welcome back, to my past self, to your future selves, and to us in the present." "I've missed a lot," Heinrich admitted, eyes lowered. "You haven't disappointed me, have you?" John asked. Heinrich rubbed his nose and answered, "As Edgar's light, I think I've done all right." Always. Heinrich looked up, and for a moment his gaze was like dawn. "Your light illuminates every corner. Even the darkness of Edgar. It's like light there as well." Heinrich pressed a hand to his chest, heart like light. John Wick placed a hand over his own heart, smiling seriously. "I am honored to be your king." Across the room, the star spirits watched their creator's banquet. 11 of them sat in a row, each a little echo of the people who had founded the society. Hector and Hermes mimicked John's toast. A tiny dragon stood with its hands on its hips, imitating Malfoy. A long-haired star spirit sat primly like a model student. One spirited star used a light rope to hang the noisy little dragon up, while a silent one watched the muscular star spirit with curiosity. A lively spirit swung its feet. A rigid spirit strode over to stop the dragon's provocation. Another sparkling spirit, amused, let the rope hold the dragon anyway. An adventurous spirit pondered which door to explore next. They were shadows of the Constellation Society's original members. When everyone had gone, these 11 might be all that remained to reflect them. New recruits to the society could see the silhouettes of those dazzling figures in these star spirits, little bright echoes of an era that had made the magical world shine. The gathering lasted until 11. With exams the next day, it was time to leave. Only Malfoy insisted on one more wrestling match with Neville. After being pinned in 3 rounds, Malfoy grew sulky and withdrawn. The next morning, Ministry of Magic proctors arrived at Hogwarts and the NEWT exams began. The schedule felt like a replay of the 5th-year OWLs, but reversed. Practical exams in the morning and written papers in the afternoon. First up was Charms. The 4 long tables in the Great Hall had been cleared away and replaced with neatly spaced desks and chairs. In the foyer, Malfoy paced, loudly cheering on Astoria. "It's nothing. You can do it," he announced with affected grandness, waving an arm. "A mere exam. My Astoria will handle it with ease." Astoria's face was pale. She moved into the hall as if in a trance, barely hearing him. In the room off the foyer, several proctors waited. Hannah Abbott. If John Wick was joked about as the King of Hogwarts, Hannah might have been the school's iron-capped first, always the first to be called. The name sounded to her like a sentence, and she trembled until Neville squeezed her hand and sent her in. John Wick and Malfoy were farther back in the queue. Because everyone's subjects differed, not all the candidates showed up for each room. John Wick, however, would appear in every examination room that day. When it was Malfoy's turn, he swaggered in as if his parentage were carved across his face. Draco Malfoy, firstborn son and sole heir of the most ancient house. The examiners, seeing the young man who had already earned a medal for bravery and a Merlin medal, paid him extra attention. "Hogwarts has really blossomed this year," Marchbanks said to the older examiner beside her. "It's much livelier than in our day." The old man was hard of hearing. "What hot cats," he blurted, misunderstanding, and Malfoy snapped back, hands on hips. "Bring on the questions." The old man grumbled and took offense. When Malfoy growled, "Hurry up and give me the questions," the examiner thought he'd been told to hurry and get out. Voices rose. Insults were exchanged. "Old geezer!" And by the time the argument settled down, Malfoy had completed his paper and was carried out in a flurry of laughter and exasperation. John Wick heard the commotion as he entered. Everyone in the room suddenly seemed intensely interested in him. The old man who had argued with Malfoy sprang to his feet, nimbly dodging desks to shake John's hand. "John Wick," the man said, eyes bright. "I'm Robin Spencer. A pleasure. Heard of your work on magic classification. A new way of thinking." "Hello." John shook his hand. Spencer looked like the sort of charm scholar who'd rather be studying curiosities at home than proctoring exams. "These exams are awful," he continued. "Let's see something interesting." If it hadn't been for John's reputation, Spencer would never have given up his comfortable retirement with his pygmy puffs to come proctor. He was obsessed with the study of magic. For a moment, John considered and then asked, "Does it count for extra credit?" "Of course," Spencer said, suddenly very alert, "provided it's satisfying. I'll be honored." John smiled and pressed his hand down lightly. A ripple surged outward. The surrounding desks remained unchanged. The examiners exchanged puzzled looks until one reached out and knocked a desk. To everyone's astonishment, the desk crumbled as if weathered for 10,000 years, turning into dust and scattering. John drew his wand and held it out. The dust congealed and reassembled itself 2 meters away, reforming into the exact desk it had been. "Beautiful," Spencer exclaimed. A silver flash trailed John's wrist as the desk slid back into its original place. "How did you do that?" Spencer asked, breathless. He had hardly seen any wand work. It had seemed to appear from nowhere. John only smiled. Spencer, delighted, leaned forward. "After you graduate, any plans to compile magical texts?" "I and some old friends formed the Researchers Association," John said. "We're hoping to keep developing and cataloging spells. You might be interested." The examiners stirred. The Researchers Association was a name few outside certain circles knew well, but its work shaped the magical world, compiling and modifying spells, researching effects, improving capabilities. In effect, it was magic's weapons research department. It wasn't a place anyone could enter. Only those with the ability to create magic could approach its threshold. Its members were seasoned wizards and scholars from many fields. "I don't think I have plans right now," John added, declining politely. Spencer smiled and waved a hand. "We welcome you anytime." They all knew Spencer valued John's creativity. Given his demonstration and reputation, it was no surprise when the charms examiners awarded John Wick an outstanding. When he stepped out, Malfoy was still grumbling about that old man, Spencer. It was noon. Astoria kept asking John to confirm whether she'd made any mistakes. Malfoy snapped indignantly. "Why didn't you ask me? My charms grade was an O." Astoria didn't know what to say and just replied, "I feel more at ease asking John." Daphne sneered. Malfoy had been bragging about that grade for ages. In the afternoon, the battlefield shifted. Professor Flitwick warned everyone not to bring self-correcting ink or cheating devices like remembralls, and as he spoke, he made a point of walking past the two big boys, Goyle and Crabbe. It was a miracle those two oafs had managed to pass their aube duels. At one time, they'd infuriated Professor Flitwick in seventh-year classes. Flitwick paused beside John and said, "Spencer invited you to join the Researchers Association? That's a fine place." "My head's not in it right now," John shrugged. "Maybe when I retire." Flitwick agreed with a wry look. John currently held power in Britain. For him to join a research society would be like the President of the United States becoming a monk. The charms written exam wasn't difficult for John. He finished in half an hour and then cleared his mind. The reverse scale charm on his chest fed him dark energy. For a moment, his fingers turned a grayish white, then snapped back to normal. This energy corrodes the human body, he thought. He absorbed a surge of dark energy, but his palm didn't change. Last time, in the dark dimension, the endless darkness pouring into him hadn't caused any side effects, so this power couldn't hurt him. He kept drawing the darkness in as he waited for the hourglass on Professor Flitwick's desk to empty. When it did, Flitwick waved his wand and every parchment fluttered toward him. There were looks of relief and anxiety all around. Goyle scratched his head, Malfoy looked smug, and Daphne recalled her answers cautiously. After charms would come transfiguration the next day. The number of people asking John for answers had grown from just Astoria to include Malfoy, for practice was easier to lean on than theory. By Tuesday, the schedule was staggered with the fifth years. Hannah was the first to go that morning. John saw a camel come out of the classroom and then another, and Hannah looked close to tears trying to stop them. It was chaotic inside. When Malfoy's turn came, his usual arrogance was gone. Transfiguration had always been his weakness. He didn't swagger when he came out. By conservative estimate, his performance had been merely acceptable. The Transfiguration exam was overseen by Marchbanks. John stood, looked around, and dryly asked, "Bonus points?" The examiners blushed a little. After all, facing someone who'd stood against the Dark Lord, their questions felt like child's play. It seemed kinder to let him do whatever he wanted. John flexed his neck. A tail grew from his spine, and two dragon-like horns sprouted from his forehead. "Human transfiguration," he announced. The examiner's eyes lit up. Human transfiguration was the toughest branch, part skill, part a willingness to experiment on one's own body. It wasn't an animagus change. It reminded people of a Dakuvaga. Examiners whispered, there'd once been a Dakuvaga at Hogwarts, During the Triwizard Tournament, Crumb had transformed his head into a shark's head for the underwater rescue. Dakuvaga typically transformed into shark-like forms, but John could selectively change parts of his body at will. Ouagadougou wizards had some remarkable animagi who turned into elephants or lions, but nothing like John's semi-humanoid metamorphosis. A murmur of amazement went around the room. One examiner reached out to touch the tail. John lashed out reflexively. The man cried out. The pain nearly broke his hand. Unsurprisingly, John was certain to receive an outstanding. In the afternoon, Professor McGonagall patrolled the essay exams. When she passed John, she paused and studied his essay with an intense, scrutinizing eye. As a leading authority in transfiguration, she could find no flaw. She swallowed the urge to discuss it with him on the spot, and her sharp gaze cut across to Goyle, who was about to chew on his quill. Tuesday's exams wrapped up. Malfoy was crushed. Transfiguration had taken a piece of his pride. Daphne, by contrast, left confident. Neville looked uncertain. Transfiguration wasn't his strength either, but his specialty was coming up. Wednesday brought herbology. As an alchemist, these topics were almost freebies for John. Neville performed excellently, and Professor Sprout even talked with him after the exam about staying on at the school. Thursday was defense against the dark arts. During the essay portion, Sirius nearly grabbed Harry's paper and loudly celebrated how brilliant his godson was. Friday was runes. Once John entered, the exam room had turned into a large study group. Professor Babbling half-joked that she wanted to serve him tea and biscuits. A student who had never attended her class had still reviewed her textbooks thoroughly. If that wasn't cheating, what was? The second week began with potions. John raised an eyebrow and mentioned to the examiner beside him, 3 drops of banshee tears will enhance the hypnotic effect. Why didn't I think of that? The examiner blurted, hastily jotting notes. The boy sitting next to John looked baffled. He'd assumed having John there meant the exam would be a free-for-all. The examiner blocked him with a look. Who did he think John was? If he knew what the boy was thinking, he'd laugh. John wasn't some ordinary student. 2 first-class Merlin medals hung on his record. He'd participated in Wolfsbane potion research, solved the blood curse, and developed the ruby potion. How could a humble potions master set a meaningful exam for someone of his stature? When the essay topic turned out to be the Wolfsbane potion, Professor Snape held the sheet a long moment and then looked at the man who'd taken part in making it. Any answer John gave would be the standard answer. If a student wrote something different, the fault would lie in misunderstanding the source. After all, the original author could be arrogant. Care of magical creatures was almost a farce. John, Hagrid, and the examiner stood in the pens in silence for a moment. How are you planning to test me? John asked Hagrid. Hagrid hesitated and said, should we deal with the moss under the giant's feet? I remember Grop often goes down to the lake with Joe Wu, doesn't he? He's had a bit of a stomach problem lately, probably from something he ate. They walked and talked. It was the most relaxed exam anyone could imagine. The examiner felt unnecessary. Astronomy had sessions in the afternoon and evening. Divination came in the morning. John looked at the examiner in the queue for his reading with mild amusement. Had he become a diviner now? He also sat arithmancy. Astronomy essays asked straightforward questions about satellites and observing Centaurus at night. The last 2 days were history of magic, Muggle studies, and finally alchemy. Alchemy was scheduled last. After finishing Muggle studies, John went to alchemy and found more examiners than students already seated, upright and waiting. Who was the largest supplier of alchemical products in the magical world now? Silverhand. Who ran Silverhand? John Wick. He was the founder of the Of series and had taken part in the renovation of Azkaban. The Of series had sharply cut ministry casualties, and the magic circulation device in Azkaban was a marvel. With those 2 credentials on his record, no one in the magical world fancied setting exams for John Wick. Perhaps one person could have, the man who'd taught him, the second king of the magical world and the first king of alchemists, but he was already dead. John looked at the many alchemists present. He even recognized employees from the Silver Hand Alchemy Workshop among them. They were more than qualified to be examiners. John sighed. Bonus project? He muttered. Why was everyone else taking exams while he was being pressed into teaching everywhere?